but yeah, I realized when I was making the red pill that every interview I entered with men's rights activists, I was trying to get them to say something that would lead to that frumpy, misogynistic pig type documentary. And, you know, I wasn't pushing for it, or I wasn't going to do anything that would, you know, try to get them to say a few words that I could then edit later to make it sound like a sentence that they hate women or want to turn back the clock on women's rights. Because in actuality, all the men's rights activists I met, none of them want to go back to the 50s or take away, you know, women's right to vote or women's right to own property or get an education. None of them want to take that away. So I think that's, you know, a big misconception that's, you know, kind of doctored up by the media to make people fear them.
Well, I have so many questions, but like I want to wait. So just to give context, like, why don't you give us a background for our viewers who don't know you or the red pill, you know, about your background and how you got to the point of making the documentary?
Okay, so my background, I grew up in a small suburb of Seattle. Then I moved to Las Vegas for high school. I started doing theater and on-camera acting classes in Vegas.
Oh, I didn't know you lived in Vegas.
I did, yeah, in Summerlin. I actually loved it there. It was a great place to go to high school, and still do everything, you know, that's legal and not criminal. It's still a fun place to be. So when I turned 18, I was like, all right, sure, I go to college, UNLV, and get a major in theater, and what am I going to do with that degree? And so I talked to my acting coach, and he said, you know, you're 18, you know, LA, you know, girls in the earlier years definitely have a better chance of kind of getting the starlet roles. And so he said, just go out there, start to audition and get, you know, an education in street smarts. And so I moved out to LA when I was 18, not knowing a soul in town, and lived there until I was, I think, 23, and pursued acting and realized that, I learned a lot of things, but realized I wasn't a good actress, which is fine, because I think, you know, everything works out for a reason. But, you know, I got kind of pigeonholed in horror films and died a lot, and I had a good scream, so I was proud of that. But was in a lot of horror films and had fun, but, you know, I wasn't good. So, but what I really enjoyed about acting, like the reason why I got into that, and I don't think this is true for all actors, but the reason I got into it was because I loved seeing this rawer side of real people and their stories that you don't usually get to see in, you know, in prim and proper kind of, you know, films, things like this, or, you know, big interviews and that sort of thing. At least through film, you can see those darker moments of what people go through. And so my favorite films were ones that were based on true stories. So Boys Don't Cry, Monster, Erin Brockovich. You know, I have a theme here of, you know, powerful women, serial killer women. But, you know,
one way or another, they were very confident.
Strong women. Female characters, let's put it that way, whether they're good or bad. So that's why I got into acting, was I loved seeing that rawer side of the human experience. So while I was living in LA, I was very isolated. I'm also an introvert, so I kind of, you know, self-isolate. But I had an unlimited subscription to Blockbuster when that was still around.
Oh my God.
I know. So I exhausted every independent film with a laurel on it and just watched them all. And once I got through all those, I'm like, well, what's next? And so I started watching documentaries. And I rented Jesus Camp. And that was the one that I was like, like, this is amazing, because it is showing this side of humanity that isn't shown in that kind of raw light usually. And I grew up evangelical Christian, so I really appreciated how the filmmakers showed the side of, you know, Jesus camps and that kind of thing, that in a way that was respectful to the people and didn't comment on, you know, what to make of it. As an audience, as a viewer, you can just make whatever you want, and really all it inspires is conversations afterwards with the people who watched it with you or at a different time. And I just really love that. And also it kind of gave me the maybe false confidence to think that I could make documentaries as well, because they filmed it on one camera, no lighting, traveling. And I thought I could do this, foolishly. And so that's how I started my first documentary when I was 21 years old. It was called Daddy, I Do. It was about sexual education in America, but it particularly looked at this movement called purity balls, where girls as young as 6 years old would go to a prom-like event with their father and vow to remain a virgin until marriage. And the father would vow to protect his daughter's chastity. And either a ring or a white rose would be exchanged as, a symbol of the promise. And I found this movement to be really fascinating, because I would have done that if that was around when I was growing up. But then as a 21-year-old woman in LA, I realized I don't know, or I questioned if it was really a good thing for girls to go through, to put your sexual purity on that kind of pedestal, and then what happens after, especially if you lose it in a way that you didn't want that to have happen, or was different than your hopes. And a great example of something that I think illustrates the issue with purity movements is there was a TEDx talk by Elizabeth Smart, and I've liked Elizabeth Smart ever since.
And she was the one that was abducted.
She was, yeah. I forget how old she was, maybe 12, but she was abducted and I think held captive for 9 months or something like that by a man and woman, husband and wife, and, tortured her, raped her, all these things. And she came out and did a TEDx talk about this, and it's great. I highly recommend it. But she talked about how she knew she had opportunities to escape because they would go out in public and she was told to be quiet by her captors, but she did see opportunities to escape. But partly the reason why she didn't was because she thought, who would want me now? Because she grew up very strict Mormon, and she thought, I'm damaged goods now. What kind of life can I have after this? And, that's just so heartbreaking to me to think that, the way she was raised and taught about sex would lead her to believe that being with people who kidnapped her and tortured her and raped her would be better than the rest of the world.
So that inspired this documentary.
Well, actually not Elizabeth Smart. I just really love her as a person. And also when I was younger, people told me I looked like her. So that's why I kind of started learning about her story. But that's just an example of, I think what's going on for a lot of women who grew up in very strict religious, kind of sexually suppressed environments. But then you also have this other swing of the, embracing promiscuity and that sex before marriage isn't a problem. And, I'm not for that either. I'm not for going so far where you don't teach people, men and women, both how to be very, make educated decisions and know the consequences of those actions. And, of course, even saying that I know can upset certain groups of people. I'm not saying that, you bring, some kind of rape or assault or any, I don't think any crime can happen to you when you're yourself not,
Well, it's funny you bring that up, and I know this is kind of going off on a side note, but it's funny, I do think of that too, because you hear, if this is what you're saying, another example of that might be, oh, don't dress super revealing if you don't want that kind of attention. Mm-hmm. And, some people would say, and I think this is what you're saying, don't, you can't say that. Mm-hmm. Because women should be able to wear whatever they want without any type of repercussion, which, of course, I totally agree with. But then I've also thought, would we be okay with a man walking around with his thing out?
Yeah.
Or wearing, those weird thongs or whatever. No, I wouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'll be looking.
Yeah. And that's, when we talk about gender politics, because that's really, the area that I'm really interested in, and all my work's been around that. Gender politics in general is what I've come to understand since the red pill is you have to look at the bigger picture. And something that really commonly helped me throughout making the red pill was reversing the genders in your mind for any scenario and asking yourself, would that fly? Would that be okay? And so your example is perfect that, would we say that women should be able to wear whatever they want and whatever happens to them, is society's problem that they didn't ask for it by addressing that way. But, what would happen with, a guy burying himself in a professional situation or atmosphere. So, I think it's, if we're talking about equality, we should then include every demographic and wonder, would that be okay in certain scenarios? And with feminism, because I was, a feminist for 10 years, and then after making the red pill, I revealed that I no longer consider myself a feminist. And it was because the blinders were on towards women's issues and not looking at the broader scope of what's going on. So, I think looking at women's issues and girls' issues, which are still near and dear to my heart, is important, but we do need to open up the frame.
So when did you decide to make a documentary about the men's rights activists?
So my first film was Daddy I Do, about sex education and purity balls. Second feature documentary was called The Right to Love, An American Family, which looked at gay marriage, a gay couple in the San Francisco Bay Area and their 2 adopted kids, and they were legally married. And so the film came out before same-sex marriage was legalized across the nation. So that came out in 2012. And then I went through this period of like, okay, what do I do next? And there was even a point where I was saying I was never going to make a film again. I was submitting my resume to being like video content creators for Facebook and different Silicon Valley. Well, because I hadn't yet, even after those 2 feature films, I hadn't become a professional full-time filmmaker where I could make ends meet just by making documentaries. Documentaries are really the charitable genre of filmmaking. It really has to just be a passion project that you're willing to pour your blood, sweat, and tears into without knowing if it'll ever make a return, let alone support your life. I hadn't found, financial stability yet after that work. So I started doing commercial work. I did a documentary commercial series for Xfinity Comcast, and that was a lot of fun. It was about a 7-year-old blind girl who watches and enjoys but enjoys films. And so they wanted to recreate her version of The Wizard of Oz that's in her mind on a soundstage. And so I did their documentary series for that. I directed it. So that's called Emily's Oz. And I did a slew of other short projects. I did a little infomercial thing for the International Museum of Women, and did a short film project about getting girls into STEM education. It was called The Story of Goldie Blocks. It was a toy that was developed to kind of be like had the benefits of Legos, but be attractive to girls. And
so you were very much in
women's
issues.
Yeah. And I still, love empowering girls, and because, that's what I wanted and needed when I was growing up because I was very ambitious, but I was also insecure of, what could I do? And I do think there's some truth to, if you see it, then you can be it. So, I always really admired strong, powerful women and when I was growing up, and I wanted to become that. And, I've always been very career driven. So getting back to your question, how did I start a film on the men's rights movement? I went through this period where I was like, I think I should just get a standard 9-to-5 job and call it quits on the documentary thing. And there was just a little part of me that thought, okay, I just have a little more steam in me. What about another film? And, in all honesty, I thought, I was watching the other documentaries coming out at that time. There was one called Marwin Call, that won a lot of awards at festivals. And I watched another documentary called Love Me, Love My Doll, which is about these guys that have like sex dolls that they take care of. And it was really interesting documentary because you could tell that they have these dolls as like a relationship, an intimacy part rather than just the physical act. And, you know, so they're caring for it and talking to it like it's their
Wasn't there, didn't Ryan Gosling do a movie?
Lars and the Real Girl.
I didn't see it, so I don't know if it's the same. I just know it was about a doll.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was a documentary called Love Me, Love My Doll. And so anyways, around this time I was thinking, well, what makes a really compelling, interesting documentary? And I was thinking about these films and how they're just really beautifully shot, but they were about these kind of uncomfortable things and
kind of undergroundish type communities.
Yeah. And, you know, and then the characters really just became the stars of the film because they were so different than the average person. And it made you not want to turn it off, not want to look away because it's just so fascinating. So I knew I wanted to find something like that that's just a little bit uncomfortable, but I also, you know, love gender politics. And also around the same time for a while, I was thinking about making a documentary about rape culture because, well, and I talked about this in The Red Pill, but there was a story in Steubenville, Ohio about a girl being sexually assaulted on camera and photos of this at a, I think she was, in high school, but it was at a party. And that was just so infuriating to me because, you know, the press was saying, well, what was she wearing? Why did she drink so much at that young of age? She shouldn't be drinking at all. And why did she go with a bunch of guys she didn't know with leaving her girlfriends behind? And you know, oddly enough, side quick tangent, I went out to dinner with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband. And I brought up the Steubenville rape case. And this was before I started making The Red Pill. But I brought it up to him and he started asking those questions. Well, why was she drinking so much? Why did she leave her girlfriends at the other party to go with a bunch of guys she didn't know to this other party and be the only girl without a buddy system? And so we were in a sushi restaurant.
I like how you remember every detail.
It was a pivotal moment in our relationship. It was probably still today the worst fight we ever had. And I just started crying like Reese Witherspoon and Legally Blonde, where it's like, I was making a scene, and then, you know, I wouldn't talk to him the rest of the dinner, and then we, you know, drove home because we were living together at that point, and I threatened to leave in my car to go to my parents' house to spend the night, and he wouldn't let me leave in the car. He wanted to talk it through. And you know, we kind of just put a pin in it. And it's not like I, you know, saw the light or changed in that night at all. It was more just like, all right, we had this fight, this happened. But it always stuck with me about, okay, why did I react that way? Why did he ask those questions? Is he a misogynist? Is he a rape apologist? Because, you know, from the feminist perspective, rape culture is a culture that condones or accepts rape, you know, men raping women, and that's the feminist perspective. And so, you know, I started to ask these questions: is my boyfriend that I love, that I want to marry, you know, what feminism has taught me to fear, and you know, we had more conversations, and he told me, you know, of course not, you know, I'm not condoning what those guys did to her or that she's asking for it, but, you know, you do have to, you know, just like guys have to be aware of their surroundings when they're walking down a dark alleyway at night. And actually, you know, robbings and homicides, men are far more likely to be victims of, you know, robbing or at gunpoint and things like that. So, you know, I started to try to expand my mind and see his perspective, but that's kind of so all this jumbled together, you know, I wanted to make another documentary, the rape culture thing, my boyfriend and our big fight. And then I was researching rape culture, and I was wanting to figure out, well, what is perpetuating and causing this? And that's when I stumbled down the internet rabbit hole of finding a men's rights website called avoiceformen.com, and they were the largest and fastest growing men's rights online hub. And by far, you know, especially at the time, they were the most provocative, and the person who started it, Paul Elam, who we interview in The Red Pill, he's, you know, definitely a provocateur. He says things to get a rise out of people, and you know, I definitely went through my own kind of understanding and transition of what I initially thought of him to now how I've kind of made peace with who he is and how he acts. But So that's basically how I found the men's rights movement. I thought I was going to be making a documentary about misogynist creeps that was going to be, that I was going to film fly on the wall and just let them be pigs. And I thought, okay,
be their misogynist selves.
Yeah.
And you were going to document that.
Yeah. So that's really what I went in thinking. And, even to this day, like if I think really hard about it, I could have made that film if that was my goal, and tried harder to find the anonymous trolls online and say that they're a men's rights activist, and thrown away all the very reasonable interviews that I got with men's rights activists and the issues that they talk about that I ended up really sympathizing with. So I that could have been the film, is just, finding the creepiest guys and getting them caught off guard, and with creative editing and frumpy music to make them, look a certain way.
Well, why didn't you make that film?
Because when I really started, it took 3.5 years to make the film.
Oh, wow.
And I think when you sit with your video footage and everything you've learned, and then fact check and go down multiple internet rabbit holes to really figure out what they're trying to say, once you do all that work and really sit with it and consider it and have more of an open mind, but ultimately be seeking truth, there was no way I could make the frumpy misogynist pig documentary that probably would have gone to many high-profile film festivals and been distributed on big platforms. And, I think that actually would have been a more successful film because of the way mainstream media has gone on gender politics right now. But with that said, the Red Pill still is way more successful than I ever imagined it could be. And I think why is because it speaks to so many people's real life experiences around the world. It's not just an American issue, it's world. And it also riles up a lot of people. So that also had something to do with getting it talked about. It hit a lot of different heartstrings or nerves for different people.
Yeah. Well, you said something in your TED Talk, I think it was, that we talk about here all the time in regards to journalists and interviewers today. You said that you realized that when you were interviewing these men, you realized you weren't actually listening to them, and that you were anticipating. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah. So I talk about that in my TEDx talk. I did a TEDx Marin talk. And that is probably the most accurate summary of where I've ended up since making the Red Pill. And, so for people who want to attack the Red Pill movie, feel free to, but really base it on, what is said that you're disagreeing with. But if you want to attack who I am as a person, then watch my TEDx talk first and tell me what you disagree with about that, because that's really my summary of my beliefs now. But yeah, I realized when I was making the Red Pill that every interview I entered with men's rights activists, I was trying to get them to say something that would lead to that frumpy misogynistic pig type documentary. And, I wasn't pushing for it, or I wasn't going to do anything that would, try to get them to say a few words that I could then edit later to make it sound like a sentence that they hate women or want to turn back the clock on women's rights. Because in actuality, all the men's rights activists I met, none of them want to go back to the 50s or take away women's right to vote or women's right to own property or get an education. None of them want to take that away. So I think that's, a big misconception that's, kind of doctored up by the media to make people fear them. And actually, a lot of them were pro-choice. A lot of them, some of them started out as feminists and then became men's rights activists because they saw a need for that discussion and they didn't see it happening within feminism. So I
And it was so interesting because when you said that, when I heard you say that, I immediately thought of that interview with Jordan Peterson and what was that other interview?
Kathy Newman.
Yeah.
I was like, saying, yeah.
Yes. And I was like, that was literally the description of what I think why that interview went so viral, is because it was an interviewer who had already anticipated what he was saying, which is not what he was saying.
Right.
So I thought that was so interesting that you recognized that in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And because I did want to, in my own feminist mind, I wanted to summarize their views as that men's rights activists believe women are inferior, or that women can't be CEOs, or that women, are only good as mothers and stay-at-home housewives. Like, but that wasn't what they were saying at all. And their views are so much more nuanced. And that's why I think the men's rights movement and anything that goes against the feminist narrative, why it's so quickly written off or attacked, is because it's so nuanced. It can't be a tweet. It can't be a meme with just, one stat without a citation. Some of the, partly what got me so involved in feminism was the start of social media. So I moved out to LA in 2004, and then around 2004, 2005, that's really when I started becoming a hardcore, staunch feminist that would evangelize to my friends. And a lot of my friends were put off that I was calling myself a feminist, and now they are feminists and hate me for doing the right thing.
For not being a feminist,
Yeah. But, I was definitely like a very proud feminist. And that was around the start of, I think I just got a Facebook account around, 2003 maybe. And then I think Twitter came out a couple years later, and then Instagram after that. And so with all these additional social media platforms, each one, I would immediately follow all the feminists that I admired and adored. And then they would post these memes and infographics. And that's what I think really became the the leaflet, if someone's canvassing or, a door-to-door salesman, it's like they give you a leaflet. The memes on social media was what got me to be a feminist, because I read about the wage gap, that women make 77 cents on a man's dollar.
I'll ask you about later.
Without a citation, without any, link of where to find the source of that stat. And it would just be a meme, and it would rile you up. And now, I no longer see that to be, the full story. So, I think that's why men's rights activists and anyone who goes against the feminist narrative has a hard time, because it's so nuanced and you really can't summarize it, not even in a 3-minute, mainstream broadcast interview. Like, you need kind of a situation like this where you have unlimited time to go into everything.
Well, in the film, you show your video diaries, like documenting your inner struggle. Like, what was that like, sorting through all of that on camera and in the middle of the filmmaking process? Well, and that's a question too, is at what point in the filmmaking process were you starting to change your perspective? Was it post or was it during filming?
It was definitely during filming. God, there was a time when I counted how many video diaries I had throughout filming, and I can't remember the number now, but it was more than the interviews we had. We had 44 interviews, so I had more video diaries than that. And, let me just say I did every editor out there a favor by not making them go through all my video diaries, because I edited the Red Pill myself. But yeah, because I don't want to put anyone through that torture. But I think having the video diaries is what allowed me to remember what my views were and why I thought that way, and why now my present day self, looking back on those diaries, sees that, my views weren't necessarily malicious. It was just uninformed, so it really helped me also kind of be in touch with the audience I want to reach, which is the good-hearted advocate for fairness, and in regards to gender in particular, that wants to see, you know, justice and fairness for both genders or all genders, however you want to put it. But, and, you know, so that I think that helped me think of who my audience is that I want to reach. And, you know, I actually don't know if I achieved that goal of like reaching people that are like who I was when I started making the red pill in 2013 when I was 27. Because, you know, I think the mainstream media has done a more effective job at smearing my name and the reputation of the film to prevent people like that from watching it. And it still really saddens me to see, you know, how many forums online of people just repeating the lies from the mainstream media about the film to make sure people don't go and watch it themselves. And so, you know, but I do know I reached a few people like me who, you know, started out as a feminist and really just wanted to see justice and fairness and had no idea what was going on for men and boys, and that it is, you know, a much bigger picture. And can I bring up something that's kind of new in my thought process? Yeah. So one thing that I love to do is see the archived versions of Wikipedia pages, because you can... I
didn't even know there were archived versions.
Yeah, so there's a website called, I think it's archive.is, and you can, basically anyone online can archive a page whenever they want to, and using that website. But I started realizing that because, you know, starting the Red Pill in 2013, the Wikipedia page for the men's rights movement was, you know, just a little blurb, and it was very small, and it didn't have the kind of information it has now. But also feminism and the different waves and everything. So I just went to the latest Wikipedia page for feminism today to see, you know, what's changed, because it almost seems like every month it's a new page. But the latest definition of feminism they have is, so it says that feminism has had many different waves, but they share the common interest and goal of, they share the common goal to define, establish, and achieve political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. And so I was looking at it, and I was thinking, okay, you know, after 5-6 years working on the red pill and everything since then, what do I think of that? And there's just one word that says it all in that: define. Feminism's goal is to define, establish, and achieve political, economic, and social equality of the sexes.
That is interesting.
They do define. That's absolutely true. And, you know, I would say that they also have achieved wonderful things that I'm absolutely grateful for as a woman. But that really is, I'm glad that that's on there, the Wikipedia page right now, because I think that that's why I'm not a feminist anymore. To summarize it, is because the way that feminism has defined gender equality really is with the blinders on for female victims, male perpetrators, and doesn't look at male victims with female perpetrators, or male victims of male perpetrators, or female perpetrators with female victims. It doesn't see, it has a blind spot for that. So, you know, when I was in Australia doing my tour, which I don't say this lightly, or I don't want to say this insensitively, but I do feel like I have PTSD from going to Australia. No. I don't know if I can ever go back, but I know there's wonderful people there who have supported me.
And this is from your press tour?
Yeah. You know, just even thinking about that trip, like, really upsets me because it was difficult. But just, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So...
The interview in Australia.
Oh, yeah. So I was on a show called The Project, which is kind of like a late night, younger millennial audience show there. And it was a long interview that was then edited down. So they didn't show everything that they asked and that I said to them, which is unfortunate. And they've never released the raw footage. So
I hear that happens a lot.
It does. And it's very infuriating. So I highly suggest anyone who talks about these issues to record a copy just for themselves, to have proof of what they said. But but on the project, they had a really a huge nationwide story that kind of became the catalyst to help raise awareness and raise funding for female victims of domestic violence. And it was the story of a woman named Rosie Batty, who her ex-partner ended up shooting and killing their son. And so this story, which was, many years before I was in Australia doing the project, this story was brought up by one of the female hosts on the show, the project. And she said, well, Cassie, we have a lot of issues in Australia here with female victims of domestic violence. For instance, Rosie Batty and her son was killed. And I had never heard of this story before, but instantly I thought, well, that's interesting that it's a son that was killed in this domestic violence scenario. And it's the catalyst that led to this big nationwide, violence against women initiative. So I very innocently and calmly brought it up on the show that, well, that's interesting. It's a son. It goes to show that men can be victims of domestic violence as well. And apparently that was a wrong thing to say in Australia.
Why?
Because, well, it was just, that's like, feminists in Australia, that is the story that, is their banner that they hold to say why they need, help and funding, which of course I'm not saying they don't need help and funding for female victims of domestic violence. It's just interesting to me that that's the story that became the poster child, so to speak, of the movement. So I brought up, that it was a boy victim. And so one of the hosts quipped back saying, so you're looking at it not like it's a male that was the one that murdered this child. And, it was a very quick and on-the-fly interview, so I didn't, in the moment, have time to really process and explain my thoughts. But now, a year later, I think what a lot of people don't get about the men's rights movement or about the Red Pill movie is that, we're not, the film The Red Pill isn't saying that men don't do atrocious things or that we shouldn't, talk about that or care about that, but it's looking at male victims that are rarely discussed with compassion and empathy and a drive to find solutions or to help them. And so I think that's what needs to be understood in this, discussion about men's rights, men's issues, is that men's rights activists are looking at the victims. And yes, they will say that men are a majority of perpetrators in a lot of different criminal situations. But, a great response to that is that just because, for instance, like 99% of war deaths are men, and a feminist would say, well, aren't men sending us to war and it's men's fault? One men's rights activist explained it to me because I asked him that question. He said, well, it doesn't mean it's not a men's rights issue just because, the people in power happen to be a majority of men. For instance, he said, female genital mutilation is a woman's issue that feminism has been talking about and fighting against for, decades. And female genital mutilation within those communities are most often perpetuated and influenced and even acted out by the mothers and midwives in those communities and grandmothers. They're the ones really pushing for that. But it doesn't make it not a woman's issue because the people who are really pushing for it are majority women. So, where I end up now, I'm not a men's rights activist because I don't think they have, the full scope either. Although I think a lot of men's rights activists, for instance, Warren Farrell, although he wouldn't call himself a men's rights activist.
He doesn't?
No, he says he's a gender transition activist or gender roles transition activist.
Gender transition activist sounds like kind of a different thing.
Gender. I'm trying to remember what the term was. No, I'm sorry, Warren. But he's looking for making it acceptable for men to take on more, feminine type roles and that be okay. So more men that are elementary school teachers or nurses.
Yeah.
All these different fields that are female dominated, that you don't see the same kind of affirmative action programs to try to get more men in those fields. But there are a lot of men's rights activists who do see the bigger picture, but they claim the title men's rights activist to specifically work on an area that's not talked about a lot or doesn't have a lot of support or funding. And the National Coalition for Men, based out of San Diego, they're really great about finding the inequalities in the law and then going to fight that. So right now, one of their latest, I believe, successful victories was to they were countering the all-male selective service, the draft. So still to this day, every 18-year-old boy has to register for the selective service in the United States in the case that there's a draft. And the last time we had a draft was in Vietnam. And I know a lot of people, especially feminists today, would say, well, we don't have the draft anymore, so why does it matter? Well, it matters because still every 18-year-old boy has to register, and if he doesn't, he can be fined up to $250,000 or spend up to 5 years in jail.
Really?
Yeah, I know. And as a woman, you never hear about that or think about that. So
I could be wrong, but literally days ago, a week ago, did they, maybe this is what you were saying before, didn't they just pass something that says that now women are also...
Well, so this is very current. I think in the last few weeks, the National Coalition for Men did successfully sue and win. So now the judge is deciding whether or not they're going to eliminate this selective service entirely or add women into selective service. And I don't have a position on that, so I won't talk about that. But I will say that in a lot of other countries, women are drafted, but they're drafted into what's called war work. So it's administrative type positions and the feminist movement has, whenever men's rights activists, because they started around the 70s, it's been around for a while. So whenever men's rights activists brought up the draft or the all-male selective service, feminists would retort by saying, well, women can't even serve in combat positions. So that's why women aren't drafted, is because they can't serve in combat positions. But then that was changed, I think, in 2013 or 14. Now women can serve in combat positions, but it's still... taken a while for the law to catch up and then ask itself, well, then should we include women in the selective service if they can serve in every position in the military now? So, I don't know what my position would be on that. I know that there's obviously a lot to consider because women of childbearing age can have a lot of complications if they were drafted into, something that they weren't prepared or... physically able to do. So, but, I think these kind of discussions are valuable. Well,
go ahead and talk about the men's issues that you do highlight in the film, because there's quite a few of them. And I did want to say to your point about, I forget what, I think it was someone's reaction to the film you were making. I was telling... I've just in telling some people that I was having on a filmmaker who made a movie about the men's rights activist. I got some intense reactions from people who didn't even know who you were, or let alone the red pill. And so kind of on the same note of talking about the reactions to the film, like, were you expecting this reaction that you received?
Well, I guess it came in stages because 1 year before the film was released in theaters for a limited theatrical run, I did a Kickstarter campaign specifically for post-production funding for the film because I already been filming and I even started editing the film before I launched this Kickstarter campaign to raise post-production funds. And so the Kickstarter was really my first kind of market survey on how people would react to the film. And I really did think at that time, this was in, I think, October 2015, I really did think that the people who supported my previous work would support the idea of the red pill. I wasn't expecting anyone, to fund it. Like, if they want to, that's great. But But I at least thought I would have support as far as like a verbal, affirmation, like, oh, good, that's great that you're doing this. So I submitted my Kickstarter campaign and my little video to all the people I'd gotten in contact with from my previous work in women's issues, and also some of the press that really promoted my previous films. And pretty much, gosh, if I had to throw a statistic out there, it'd be about 95% of them hated it, just hated the idea of it. And one press resource in particular, I'm trying to think if I could say it was a big online publication that supported a previous film of mine. And so I sent her the Kickstarter asking if they'd be willing to share it, because I thought the video in itself was really interesting to share. And she responded by saying, if you showed men's rights activists being violent in the video, then I would share it on our site. But it doesn't show that, so we're not going to post it. And so I thought that was a really interesting reaction, because it's, you're basically saying that this is the political, view that we want to promote and show. And, my video was really just showing that we're going to look into the men's rights movement and men's issues and have a nuanced discussion from all different perspectives. And I thought that in itself would be share-worthy. But now they wanted, just the teaser video to show men's rights activists as violent. So
have you ever seen, I guess, because that's the perception of MRAs, right? Of the men's rights activists, right? Is that they promote violence and rape culture, like you were saying, or whatnot. Did you see any of that? Like, where does this criticism come from?
I think it comes from the provocateurs in the movement, that people like Paul Elam, that uses, language and headlines to get attention. And gosh, he'll hate that I say this, but I think of it like the kid on the playground who's pulling the pigtails because they want attention, because no one, there's other issues going on, but they just want to get your attention and nothing else is working. And so I think, Paul has used this approach to shock and appall to get eyes on his pages, which, you could criticize him all you want. It worked. That's what got the most press for the men's rights movement. Granted, it was very negative press. But before A Voice for Men, they had a men's liberation movement in the 70s. And then along with, the second wave feminism that kind of died out, 80s and 90s, people were, comfortable with the working woman. And, to then be a feminist was to be living in the past. We got all the rights, just, be your own person. It was very much an individualistic time in the 90s, the good old days. But the men's, especially fathers' rights, they're still trying to do a lot of work in improving things, because the family court system was still very corrupt and hadn't ever really had, an activist movement that gained traction in the media.
You're talking about the 80s, 90s?
Yeah. But even in the 70s, but that the men's liberation movement was trying to get attention on fathers' rights, and never really broke into the mainstream media to have it be a national or worldwide conversation. But people who experienced it firsthand definitely knew what was going on. And then here, with social media around, I became a feminist around 2004. I think Voice for Men, gosh, I can't remember what year they came out, but I want to say around 2006, 7, 8, something like that. And but Paul was, he was a pit bull that came out with just, fireworks blazing and everything. And
what are some of the things that he would write or say that makes him this provocateur? I actually don't know.
Yeah. Well, so I address the most commonly the most commonly used cherry-picked soundbite in his articles that really riled people up. So I addressed that in the Red Pill movie, and the soundbite was Paul Elam saying, "I declare October to be Bash a Violent Bitch Month."
Okay.
And so that was in an article called, sorry, that if I talk about A Voice for Men and Polly Lum's writings, there's going to be a lot of curse words. So I'm sorry if that's
Oh, no,
a problem.
it's fine. No, we don't care.
But I think the title was called "If You See a Jezebel on the road, Run the Bitch Down," or something like that. And so he's referring to the website Jezebel, which is, was a very big feminist website. I think it's having trouble now, but I was, an avid subscriber of Jezebel when I was a feminist. And so that article was actually I guess, parody or satire on this other Jezebel article from something like 2007, where on Jezebel's website, they bring up a statistic that came out saying that of non-reciprocated domestic violence, 70% of the violence was perpetuated by the woman. And so, bravo to them for bringing up this statistic, because I think that is interesting and fascinating, and you don't hear about that. So non-reciprocated violence, so basically a woman who hit or stabbed or threw something at a man and he did not reciprocate the violence. So 70% perpetuated by women. And so Jezebel, the writer at Jezebel, said, we're going to do an impromptu survey in our office to see how many women have hurt or, physically assaulted a man in their life. And within that article, they bring up quite a few women, I guess, who worked at Jezebel, saying that they, slapped them, that they punched them, that they, I think, threw their computer or something else like that. And then at the end of it, they're basically making light of it, saying that the guys asked for it or deserved it. And, it's really a horrible, shocking article that I didn't even discover until I started looking into the men's rights movement. And so Paul was trying to point to the hypocrisy of that one of the largest feminist websites, Jezebel, making light of abusing men. And so here Paul comes back with, wanting to, point out the hypocrisy, but with very shocking language that a lot of people within the men's rights movement do not agree with his tactics either. I think that's not commonly talked about, where, it's not like Paul Elam is the head of, the leader of some kind of cult. Like, there's a lot of men's rights activists that do not like his approach, his style, but then he also does have, a lot of followers. But as far as the whole men's movement, it's not like they're all bowing down and approving of what he does.
So in your experience, like you said, when you were sitting down with all the footage, the vast majority of men were not like that. They didn't promote any of that.
Yeah, definitely. And, the men's rights activists that I sought out were people who were longstanding names within the movement and that were doing, a lot of work within men's rights. And like I mentioned, National Coalition for Men, they really do focus on the legal battles, and, social media is not their strong point. And so I think when
it's just a bunch of,
lawyers doing
like
a lot of hard work.
Men. Yeah.
And, they're doing a lot of work, and they don't, because they're so busy, they don't have the time to tweet about it or to do interviews. And so when, the mainstream media jokes and says that they're a bunch of whiners that don't accomplish anything, it's really sad to see that, because it's not true. And there are a lot of people working within men's rights that work really hard and put a lot of their own money as like donations, charitable donations, into helping, people in tough scenarios. So issues like paternity fraud, wrongful paternity, and, custody battles, false accusations.
Yeah, well, let's talk about all these issues, because also, like I was saying, like there's so many of them that I just don't think most people know. I didn't know, I think, until I saw your documentary. And I think they're very important points to put out there. Whether it makes people upset or not, I think that they're important to at least be out in the conversation.
Yeah.
So even starting with like workplace. You say that like 93% of workplace fatalities are men?
Yes.
Like that's very big.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I'm in a ballpark of the right numbers here, but I remembered one of the common talking points within feminism, at least when I was a feminist, was saying from like 2004 to 2013 when I started the Red Pill. Around that time, a lot of feminists would say, there was a common talking point saying that if you combine 9/11, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, within that time period, more women were killed by an intimate partner than people killed by 9/11 and those two wars combined during that time. And, you know, when you hear that, it's like, oh my gosh, that is a big, like, that's our terror issue.
Yeah,
that's our
war.
Yeah. So while making the Red Pill, I started to actually do the numbers, and, you know, and I'm not saying this to discount, you know, women who've been in that kind of situation or died from that. That's horrible. And, you know, I have a lot of, you know, passion for those issues as well. But so during those years, I forget how many years it is now, but say it's around a decade, it was roughly, you know, around 2,000, give or take, women that were killed by a partner each year during that time. And so I was thinking, okay, well, let's look into the men's issues. And so then I looked up workplace deaths, and it was around like 5,000 to 6,000 a year.
5,000 to 6,000 a year.
Yeah, that died in a workplace death. And, you know, I don't necessarily know what to make of that or what the audience hearing that should think of that. It's just an interesting perspective that, you know, and I could see feminists saying, well, the guy chose that dangerous job. The woman did not. Well, and that could be debatable too, but, you know, the woman did not choose to be with that man or be in that situation or couldn't leave or something like that. A guy could have left his job. He could have found something safer. But we need people doing those jobs.
Right.
And, you know, we have our first responders with all the fires here in California. And we have, you know, people doing the electric work, and we still have coal miners. Like, you don't hear about that now with, you know, us being in our safe little boxes on our laptops. You don't see that firsthand, so you don't think about it. But the oil rigs and the crabbing boats and all these really dangerous positions, and yes, they are, the people who work in them choose that position oftentimes because it's better paid, and it's, you know, they say they're strong and capable, and they had the opportunity, or they knew someone in the industry and they got in that way, and the money is attractive or whatnot. But whatever the reason they got into that industry, people do need to work in that industry. And, you know, when we talk about the glass ceiling, Dr. Warren Farrell says there's the glass cellar, that where is feminism's, you know, want and need and advocacy to get more women on crab ships or work in the power lines or...
Well, I can't help but bring this to what I think is probably the most mainstream feminist grievance, which is the gender wage gap. Because when I was a feminist, I heard that 70 cents to $1 statistic, and I know that to this day it's still very much a point. But I can't remember when I first heard of it. Maybe Christina Hoff Sommers a long time ago. I can't remember where I first heard of it. But when I heard that, like, when you actually break that down, it gets much more nuanced and complex. And this is one of the points that I hear, which is that a lot of these jobs, well, that first of all, that, I mean, and feel free to, you know, take over, but first of all, that number was taken in complete, in macro. They took all of the male salaries, all of the female salaries, all of the industries together and just compared those salaries. They didn't do it job by job. And then, so knowing that, that's a big difference because of what you just said, that a lot of men are working these really, really dangerous jobs that, you know, if you're saying feminists are saying to you, but they choose to do those jobs. It's like, well, yes, that's kind of the point, is that men and females are choosing to do these jobs that we're doing. And there's differences in these jobs.
Yeah.
And so that whole explanation, you know, what 93%, you know, fatalities because of more dangerous jobs. I mean, I think that's an important thing to be out there.
Yeah. And the countries that have been evaluated in gender equality, kind of like, I don't know what you call it.
Like equity, like, or, I know.
It's like like a rating of how well their gender equality is in each country, the countries with the best or the highest rating for equality actually have the biggest gender wage gap, because people are more free to choose the occupation that they want to go into. And we find that, a lot of women care about the work they go into and want to help other people. They're very, empathetic and giving and nurturing people. So they go into nursing instead of a surgeon, or they go into being an elementary school teacher instead of, a professor. And so, I think, of course, when we talk about gender, everything's kind of generalized, and there's a danger in that, but that's also how we look at the differences is in the bell curve and the broad scope. But I think, in the broad scope, generalizing, women do tend to really value fulfillment in the work they do. And often that means sacrificing pay. And, men really value pay, and we could, analyze that for years on why and how and what causes that. And I think that's really fun, to analyze. But, it is a way to get status. It's a way to get, a good catch of a woman, and to gain respect from people is to have, a bigger wallet.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting that you say that, because I was listening to, I can never remember who I was listening to, but someone was talking about like dating and modern dating, and they're saying that, even though women are becoming more educated, we're in the workplace more, we're rising the ranks more, like probably not as quickly as some people would like, but we are rising the ranks more, that even with all that, they find that the vast majority of women, when dating, still are trying to date up.
Yeah.
And that makes it very difficult for men because, well, I mean, first of all, we're taking a lot of the jobs that were used to only go to men. It's just more competition, and we're more educated. And so that makes it more difficult for them.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just very interesting.
Yeah. Hypergamy.
Oh, is that what that is?
Marrying up in status. And, that's...
Oh, maybe I heard it from your documentary.
Oh, it's not in the film, though.
Oh, okay.
So, no,
Okay,
you're doing good research. Okay. But yeah, that's a fascinating thing. And it's... these kind of topics are really you find on the, I don't know what people want to call it now. It's like dark web or the intellectual dark web, whatever.
The IDW.
Yeah. But it's, I think, the reason it's kind of in this darker part of the web is because it's politically incorrect to talk about today. And that's, what's politically incorrect is just, a bigger and bigger bag of topics. But, hypergamy and the process of marrying up is something that's gone on throughout, millennia, and it still exists today. And it is harder for guys, I think, because women are out earning degrees and really, excelling in all these different areas. Warren Farrell, I keep bringing him up because he's done a lot of great research, but he did a book called Why Men Earn More. And he talks about how if you actually look at single women versus single men, single women out-earn single men. And, I've kind of pondered over why that is because, I was a single woman for a long time before meeting my husband. And I was always very career driven. And I was very frustrated with being hit on by someone that I was trying to get a job from, that I was being job interviewed. And, also thinking that it was like a business contact turning into they're hitting on me and that kind of thing. And so I wondered, well, if single women out-earn single men, could the difference be that, this potential of a relationship, helping them rise the ranks? I know in pharmaceutical sales, women do a lot better. And, those are pharmaceutical sales reps are people who are going to, doctors and talking about what new kind of pill they have or something that they could, push on their patients. And women really do well at that. Real estate agents, women do well. There's a lot of fields, I guess, sales that if you're a single woman, an attractive woman, you can do very well. I actually very quickly worked for a car dealership. And there was probably, oh gosh, there was probably 30 people working there, and I was one of 3 women. And the guy who hired me said, you know, women earn the most here. You're going to do really well. Of course, I didn't know anything about cars, so I was quickly quit, fired, whatever happened, I left. But you know, I thought it was interesting that just being a woman, and mostly the sales were over the phone because it was car sales from dealership to dealership. Yeah. So just being a woman over the phone was very convincing, inviting, creating relationships between dealers. Yeah.
Do you know if a lot of feminists acknowledge these types of choices and differences in jobs? Because, I mean, there's a million jobs out there, and, you know, ideally you want to choose one that you enjoy, that your skills align with and your personality aligns with. Do you hear a lot of conversations about women talking about that? Like how women have tended to be drawn towards these types of occupations, or men tend to, you know, everyone knows that the STEM fields are a vast majority of men. You know, some would say that that's because, you know, just the differences in brains and personalities of gender. Like, is that something you hear a lot about, or is it mostly just about the inequality?
So hear about like in the media or from feminists, or from
like conversations within feminist communities within.
Well, I think within feminism, they really do go out of their way to, because everything's so nuanced, and information is shared so quickly, and sound bites and headlines and tweets and everything are what get the most attention. So you need to figure out, okay, well, what's your elevator pitch? And that's what we're going to stick with. Yeah. So I think feminism in general has looked at, okay, biological differences, gender differences, all that, and decided on that the best course of action, or the sound bite, or the little bit of information we really want to drill into people's heads, is that there's no difference between men and women. That women are just as capable. They can do anything a man can do, and they could do it in heels, whatever. But, you know, the problem with that is that's not the full story. And obviously there are a lot of biological differences. And, you know, those biological differences, here's where I understand where feminism is coming from, because you don't want to talk about the biological differences in a way that can lead people who are kind of short-sighted or don't want to know the full story. You don't want to lead them to believe that, okay, well, women's pregnancy issues, menopausal issues, hormonal issues could lead them to not be a good person to hire, could lead them to not be a good person to, you know, build a company with, or to be our CEO. And you know, there is a danger in that, talking about hormones, you know, which very much is a big, all women know, if you just talk in a, you know, safe space of women, we know it's a big part of our lives.
Yeah, it really is.
PMS to the period to, you know, the pregnancy issues, trying to avoid it, wanting to get it, TTC communities, and then, you know, menopause. And, you know, it is a big part of our existence. And I think for the most part, we don't talk about it because we don't want men to jump to the conclusion that, okay, she's around, you know, the age where she'd want to have kids. We probably shouldn't, you know, promote her or, you know, make her part of this firm or, you know, whatever. So there's a balance there. And that's why I do understand why feminism has been really careful about not.
So you think that because of that fear of furthering discrimination or whatnot, that let's just not acknowledge that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a complex thing. And I think every woman does really decide when to share that information and when to hold it back. I'm sure most women, you know, keep the most, you know, personal, physical issues that they're having, they keep it away from even their partner or their husband or their boyfriend, because you don't want them to then think, you know, you're not down for whatever, you know, or that you're not operating at your best ability for, like, if it's a job. So, it is kind of this private life of women. And I think, I guess the way that strong, successful women have figured out what's best to do is just to act like there are no underlying issues and look as strong and as capable as man as possible. And, and now I say that and I'm wondering, like, what are people assuming I'm saying? So, Cassie, so you're saying that women can't be a CEO?
So what you're saying is...
No, I'm not. I do think that, I'm a CEO of a company, and it is so much hard work and there's so much sacrifice. And I think that's what really needs to be told to young girls to empower them, to drive them to succeed in whatever they want to do in life, is to really be honest about how much sacrifice there is. And, whether it's sacrifice of sleep, sacrifice of your health, you're not, eating the best meals right on at the time that you should be, or not getting, meditation time or yoga time. Or
and you're talking about sacrifice to be like a high-ranking woman in the professional world.
Yeah. Yeah. And also if you're, going into a field that requires a lot of schooling, you've got to factor that in, which men always, that's what they do factor in. But they, they usually, I think what I would like to see groups that are working on preparing girls for womanhood, I would love to see them have a more honest, inclusive conversation about, okay, let's talk about family. When do you want to have a family? How do you see that family happening? How do you see being a career woman with that family? How do you see your relationship with your husband? Are you going to be the breadwinner? Is he going to be the breadwinner? If you have kids, is he going to be the stay-at-home dad? Or are you going to have a nanny who's going to make more money to pay for that nanny or to pay for that after school, tutoring or whatever? And, there's a lot of those questions that, or those conversations that need to be had and aren't happening because we're so focused on women in the workplace, or, right now with the Me Too movement, with sexual assault, which, who knows what's going to be the outcome from this whole movement? Is it going to make more women afraid to work in male-dominated fields? Is it going to make more men afraid to hire women, that they're going to be falsely accused of something or misread in what they say? So, there's so much focus on that right now. And I do think that, that was a conversation that needed to happen. It has happened. It's still happening. And that's good for the people who need to know that it's okay to go to law officials to report what happened to them and have it be looked into, with the court system or with law. So, but, there's all these other conversations. And I think women and family and motherhood and all that's really left out of the feminist conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I know when I like my 20s as well, becoming a feminist as well, I know that was the main message, because I, obviously am also a very driven girl with my career, and I want to do as well as I can. But, you get to a point where you're like, oh, well, at a certain point, I have to think about the other side as well, because I don't have the luxury of not thinking about it. And, I think for a long time, we talk about this here, I would think, I don't know if I ever want to get married. I don't know if I want to have kids. I don't know, like, as long as, if I'm doing good in my career, like, I think I'll be good and happy with that. And then, I don't know, you get a little bit older and you're like, well, I don't know. I don't think that's true. Like, I think I do want that other side as well. And I think we're probably the first generation where we have this problem, where we were constantly pushed our entire lives, but some of us, to, focus on career, be driven, be ambitious, whether it was from parents or these movements and whatnot. But you're right, there's not that other side as well. Yeah. So, but this also makes me think, speaking of family, of you mentioned in the film the issues that men also deal with families as well, and like child custody battles and support and stuff like that. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that more and more children are being born to unmarried parents now, and that, I'm not saying that in any like, oh, isn't that horrible or isn't this great or anything like that. But what I in relation to men's issues, what I do think is interesting is that of unmarried fathers, married fathers, and divorced fathers, the guys that really get the shortest stick out of the whole thing is the unmarried fathers. They have so limited rights in is the woman going to adopt the child away, even if he wants to be a present father figure or be a single dad, you know, she can adopt the child away if he hasn't already applied for legal rights to that child, even though the
a
DNA...
woman can adopt away a child even if the father is willing to raise it.
And it's a state-by-state issue, but for the most part, a guy, once he finds out that he is the father, he needs to actually apply to have parental rights or paternal rights over that child. And, you know, it's a legal process with paperwork. It's, you know...
Really?
Yeah.
So you essentially have to legally file to be the father, essentially?
Yes. Whereas if you're a married father, you know, in the marriage certificate, you are now responsible for that child. And there's another issue with that one, too, is if the woman is in a marriage with a man and she actually gets pregnant by another guy, has that child, whether or not her husband knows that it's his or not, he's still responsible, legally responsible for that child, not the guy over here. So, you know, there's a lot of legal issues.
That's real?
Yes. Yeah. So okay, back to unmarried fathers. Unless he files the paperwork to say, I am the the father of this child, and I want the rights, you know, as the father, have rights. Unless he's already done that paperwork, he doesn't have a say in if she adopts the child away. Obviously, we're just going to set aside the abortion thing now because that's a whole another can of worms. But there's another issue, is that there's no law saying that a woman has to tell the father he is a father. So there could, you know, be a one-night stand, or say they were in a relationship for a year, broke up, she found out she was pregnant later, they hadn't talked to each other in months. She never has to tell him that he has a child. But she can come back 18 years later and say, I want back child support.
Really?
Or any time frame, 1 year later, 2 years, 5 years.
And that man is then responsible for 18 years of child support.
Yes. So this is crazy to me that, you know, because I was a feminist for so long and still deeply care about all these women's issues, but never heard about fathers' rights and all these individual, you know, worst case scenarios. And when I started to talk to friends and family in my life about these issues, one reaction that I thought was really interesting was my sister, who just, you know, she broke down in tears because she started thinking about how her husband, you know, is the best father in the world. And the idea that, you know, he could have been completely removed from their lives, or all the different issues that either an unmarried or divorced father goes through, it just broke her down in tears. And so I know that people who care about gender fairness would care about these issues, but there's just no platform to really talk about it. And then also, if you're a woman and you have children, and really think about how much emotional damage that would be if either your children were taken away from you and, say, you get just 2 hours of visiting time every Saturday or every other Saturday, or you don't get to see them at all except the holidays, or I mean, obviously this would never happen because women bear the child, but just imagine as a human being what it would be like finding out you have an 18-year-old you never knew existed. That's your child. I mean,
what about the opposite of that as well, as a father finding out that someone that they raised isn't their child?
Theirs.
Is that what's called paternity fraud?
Yes, paternity fraud. And then wrongful paternity is when it's not malicious. The woman didn't mean to wrongfully say that guy was the father. She just didn't know. You know, she was with a few guys around the same time, and she didn't know who the father was, but thought for sure it was one person. So that's wrongful paternity. But paternity fraud is the woman knowing who is the father and keeping that from the father.
How common is that?
See, there's no exact statistics on this because there's also, I mean, there's no reporting. There's also no advocacy funding to try to figure out these numbers. You know, that's a big part with gender politics is you have to have organizations that have a lot of funding and support to then go do these studies to be able to say to the public, look how big this issue is. But there isn't that kind of same, you know, funding support for men's issues. So
do you know if there's a law that says if a guy finds out that the kid he raised for 18 years isn't his, does he then get to be repaid the estimated costs of raising that child?
In some cases, there have been, you know, lawsuits to get that, and they did find that to be, you know, the end result. But there are a lot of cases as well that I've heard of through the National Coalition for Men who the courts are just like, well, this is the way it's done. These are the laws, this is the paperwork. This guy's name was listed as the father on the birth certificate, and therefore he is responsible. Even if the paternity test shows that he's not. Yes. And DNA testing is another issue. There's so many issues for men's issues, but DNA testing, let's see, I'm trying to get the right number on this. I can't remember what country it is now, if it's the US or it was a different country, but it's illegal for a woman to get a DNA, or sorry, it's illegal for a man to get a DNA test done to find out if he's the father, if the woman hasn't signed off on approving that, consenting to that. I think that was France, right? Is it France? Yeah, I think I talk about it in the film. I think I learned that from your documentary. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I imagine if a relationship's in a point where he's wondering if he's the father, she's probably not in a position where she wants to sign off on that. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, when I was looking into this, I was thinking, well, why can't just every baby that's born do the DNA test and figure out who the parent is? But when I started looking into that, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of, but then, you know, when you talk about money, there's also now another segue. Yeah. That's why you're here. Infant male circumcision. You know, a lot of money goes into the medical system to have that done. And infant male circumcision is covered by many states, you know, social healthcare programs. So basically lower income families can have their baby boy circumcised on the state's dollar, on taxpayer dollars. So, you know, if we can make funding for that, which I now do believe after making the Red Pill movie that that's a violation of human rights, genital integrity issue. That video, I had never thought about it because it's so common. I was like, yeah, I'm sure I'll circumcise my kids. I feel like everyone does it. And then I saw that scene in your movie and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Wait. Why is circumcision okay of males, but female genital mutilation is seen as so horrific? So why is infant male circumcision okay, generally speaking, and then female genital? So there is a big difference in the severity. And I would agree, you know, that's what a lot of feminist organizations would argue, that they would say that infant male genital mutilation isn't that big of an issue because it's not as bad as female genital mutilation. I would agree with that. And most men's rights activists would also agree with that female genital mutilation is a really, you know, horrific, extreme thing. But it's not, you know, we need to separate the issues and look at this other issue that is, it's a human being that is having a part of their natural body cut without their consent, when the United States is the only country that widely practices infant male circumcision for non-religious reasons. So almost as like a pop cultural, you know. What is the reason for doing infant male circumcision? So, this is a very interesting rabbit hole. There's been a lot of conflicting studies, and there will be many people to tell you that it helps lower STDs and HIV rates, which is why I think it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation put a lot of money into Africa to get the men circumcised in adulthood as a way to try to lower HIV/AIDS rates. It actually ended up having the opposite effect. I should probably retract Bill. I don't know if it was Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Maybe it was something else. I could be totally wrong. Please do your own research. But it was a big foundation that funded having this widespread circumcisions done to lower the HIV/AIDS rates. It ended up having the opposite effect because they were saying it would lower the rates. The men there started not using condoms and protection, thinking that they would be immune to. Yeah. So, anyways, that's the reason. STDs and HIV is the way and the reason why infant male circumcision really kind of caught wind with the medical field.
Did it like not start happening until around the AIDS scare in the 80s and 90s?
No, it's actually a very old practice. I mean, it back to many religions. But as far as it being practiced in the U.S. for non-religious reasons, that's usually the reason that's given, or cleanliness is another reason. So the more studies that have been done, doing research is very tricky because you also have to look at how many people are they looking at, who funded this research, are we just seeing the summary, or are we seeing the whole, peer-reviewed paper? And when I was talking to intactivists, which are intactivists are people who want to support infant rights by saying, let them decide when they're of consenting age whether or not they want to be circumcised. So a lot of intactivists also support the men's rights movement because it really is a men's issue in the U.S. because we don't have female genital mutilation, legal here, thank goodness. And so intactivists would talk about that the research has really been doctored and messed with in, different funding exchanging hands to promote this because there is a lot of money in infant male circumcision. It's a medical procedure like any other done on, almost, in the U.S., I think it's around 60-70% of infant boys are circumcised. And in the world, it's actually like a quarter of the male population that's circumcised. So the U.S. is very unusual to be doing this, and I do think a lot of women and mothers are, also actively involved in making that decision for their son, not knowing, that there's conflicting opinions and research about this.
And you were saying that potentially that money could be used elsewhere. Maybe a paternity test.
Right, yeah. So because, there's state-funded money going to infant male circumcision. If we can make that happen, could we also make DNA testing be required for every child that's born? So, I think that's
that could open
a gender
up a
issue.
Can of worms.
Yeah.
But I mean, on the topic of health, there's all those other issues that you guys talk about. You talk about the one I didn't know about a lot of these, but how prostate cancer and breast cancers have the same mortality rates, but that breast cancer gets a lot more funding.
A lot more, yes. And here's another issue that's very nuanced because, I think when we talk about gender issues and, social issues, we need to look at the big picture and all the fine details and the fine print. And so, some of the fine print of that issue is the woman, the average age of the woman who dies from breast cancer is younger than the average age of a man who dies of prostate cancer. Although the rates of death from prostate cancer and breast cancer are very close to the same, the amount of people that die from those. The ages are different. And so I do see, why there's so much heart and passion for breast cancer and doing these things like the pink ribbon and everything. Because they're women with infants, or they're, newly married women, or they're mothers, they're teachers. They're very much, in society, active, have very active social lives.
I thought about that too, and I have no idea if this is true, but when I heard that statistic, I thought, well, I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that women just tend to be a little more social, a little bit more about the causes. My mom's a breast cancer survivor, and she is all about the American Cancer Society and doing walks and all this and that. And I'm like, but if I were to, God forbid, I think a lot of men I know, if they were to get prostate cancer or something, I know a lot of men just aren't the type to like suddenly go do a march or try to raise money or go to Washington, D.C. to, lobby or something like that. Yeah. So I just wondered if it was from the efforts of women,
Yeah, I think it has, all those different influences have to do with it. And, also doctors are kind of like, well, you're in your 70s. You have a high rate of prostate cancer, but you're also in your 70s. And, it's so I think, why it's good to talk about the amount of effort and funding and all this is just to show that there are other issues that are important to talk about and family members and people going through this firsthand that we should care about and talk about. And, and there's so many health issues. I mean, like, you remember with the ALS, the ice bucket challenge, which
I did that.
Of course, there was controversy about the drought in California.
I did ocean water, I think, to help, not contribute to the drought.
Yeah. But that's the thing is that, I do think that millennials and with the social media explosion that we have, it's all about awareness of these issues, to know that this can happen, to know what the signs are, the symptoms are, to know if you know someone going through this may be what they're experiencing or how they're acting, and to, understand and have compassion for them in that scenario. So, with breast cancer, I'm so glad that, there is so much awareness around this, because I'm sure it's increased the amount of, test screenings to catch it early. And so if we could just have more awareness for prostate cancer, maybe we could get, earlier tests for that to also prevent that.
And on the topic of health, I think also the life expectancy, isn't it that you say men's life expectancy is a lot shorter than women?
Years. I think it's 7-year difference.
Do we know why that is? I mean, actually, doesn't what we were talking about earlier, the dangerous jobs and workplace fatalities have to do with that? Yeah.
So when I was making the red pill, I thought, well, it must be biological, right?
That's just what I thought. It's just natural. That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's just, but no, it's actually environmental impact. So
really,
not like nature's impact, but the social kind of,
not biological,
societal impact, I guess. So dangerous jobs, workplace deaths, dangerous jobs, war deaths, not going to the doctor as much, or following up with that kind of, that could be analyzed a million different ways as far as, masculinity. And if you just don't want to admit you have a problem or face that, health issue. So there's a lot of different components going there, but men live shorter lives.
Also the suicide rate.
Yeah. And what's interesting with that is, so it's roughly 75 to 80% of all suicides are men. And I was hearing those statistics and reading that within, Western civilization countries. And I ended up finding the world's, suicide rates for all the different countries that report those type of statistics. And so it's, 130 countries or something that I did the math and figured, and I actually am good at math. That was my best subject in school. So I did the math and figured out, okay, what's the worldwide rate of all the countries that report such statistics? And it still did come out to like 78% of all suicides throughout the world were men. And it just made me realize that it's a worldwide issue. It's not just it's not just the US and a backlash to the United States feminism, or it's not just, Australia or something. It's also in, Japan and India and South Africa and Egypt and, all these other places. So
why do we think this is?
Well, that's the question. I haven't figured that out yet. I think it's just, we have made so much progress for women in talking about our issues. And maybe it is because we are the more communicative gender sex that really wants to talk about our problems and then compare notes and find solutions, and also get our loved ones to care about it as well. And, if I look at my husband's relationship, and he definitely knows about anything that I'm upset with. And I really have to pull teeth to figure out, well, what's going on for him that could be better. And, I think guys just don't really talk about what's going on for them. So when we look at especially like teen suicides, mass shooters, on school campuses.
So crazy you just say that. Just, I think this morning, and it was so random. There was no reason for me to watch it. It just showed up in my like YouTube suggested videos. It was a TED Talk about a guy that said he was almost a mass shooter when he was a kid. And I literally think I watched it this morning, and it was so crazy. It was just, and he added a perspective to it that you never hear when one of these things happen. You immediately go to, vilifying the person, which, I mean, hey, that's fair. They're a mass murderer. But to hear it from perspective of someone who was saved from that, which in short, he said it was a friend of his. He was ready to go. He bought the guns. He pretty much knew how he was going to do it. And he said that a friend of his just saw he was going through a hard time. And he said it wasn't even a big intervention, revolutionary thing. He just like offered him a hand. He just said, it was just like a human moment. He said that changed everything for him. And I thought, that's so interesting, because he was an angry kid. I think he grew up in like a severely abusive household, and he couldn't talk to anyone, and which I think relates to what we're saying with men. And I don't know if it's a biological thing, if it's a sex inherent thing, or if it is a societal thing where, men aren't supposed to be as emotional as women or as open as women. But I would put that under like the health category as well.
I think it's a combination. Any person who has both the son and a daughter can tell you that the son is just, wants to run around and touch things, has so much energy. And, I think guys have the physical, tactile, wanting to do things, which can also lead into the type of jobs that they choose. But then also, interest in, handguns. And I only just learned how to shoot a gun like 2 years ago, and it scared the crap out of me. But I was like, wow, this is so interesting that, more women don't learn how to use a gun. And it is, Erin Pizzey, who's in the Red Pill movie, she called it the great equalizer. That is a weapon that, it doesn't matter physical strength. If you have that, then you have scarily the power. But as far as mass shooters, I think that a lot of them are also suicidal. They go in knowing, or
because they kill
planning
themselves most of the time.
And so if we know that roughly 80% of all suicides are men, a lot of people in the world. Now look at, the people that are that way because they're so angry. They feel like someone's wronged them. There's intense resentment. Maybe they've been abused in their childhood. And then on top of that, maybe there is something biological in men that's more, makes them want to learn about firearms, because that is the most common way that suicide is completed is through firearm.
Don't they say that women actually attempt suicide more?
Yes.
It's just that males are more successful at it.
Yeah. And
which is, I have no idea what that means. But it is interesting.
So I was suicidal at one point.
Really?
When I was 13. And, it was a very brief chapter in my life. But I went through all the different ways of like, well, how would I? And it really freaked me out, to think of doing something like that. But, it was for the goal of the end result of just like not being here, And, but, the actual act of how to do it was what I couldn't, get to. And But what got me out of it was I knew, you know, if I told my mom, if I told my sister, immediately I'm protected. I have a support system. They're going to put me in therapy, which they did. And, you know, I always knew that I had that support if I sought it out. I eventually sought it out. I got that support. So, you know, I don't know how many guys, I mean, I hear from so many men who've watched the Red Pill movie contact me. I've had people contact me saying that the film prevented them from their plan of committing suicide.
Wow.
You know, those are what, you know, I live for, what I made this film for. Like, just for those messages are made, you know, all the horrible things I went through with the release of the Red Pill worth it, because I at least know a few lives were saved. But, you know, they don't have the same kind of support. You know, we could talk for ages also about this of, you know, masculinity, and that's, I know that's a really sore spot for men's rights activists, the term toxic masculinity, because now we're talking about something that's inherently a part of them that you're saying is inherently bad. And when I started to listen to men's rights activists about their view on toxic masculinity, and then started to, you know, turn, you know, the mirror on my own brain with feminism and think, okay, if we were in a society that accepted the term toxic femininity, that all these articles and Twitter hashtags and posts in Hollywood was constantly talking about toxic femininity, we need to, you know, conquer this evil in our world, we need to talk about toxic femininity. Oh my God, I would feel like I was walking through the world like I was already a criminal or some kind of evil person without having done anything wrong, but feeling like you already need to apologize just for being alive.
Well, and that was a huge takeaway from watching your film, was taking away what would the word be? Just every guy that you interviewed, they had a sense of defeat about them. They seemed so tired and they seemed really defeated. And I mean, a lot of the guys you featured, I mean, you could tell these were not like people looking to be on camera and be a media figure. They were just normal guys. Like some of them were kind of shy and whatnot. And they were just trying to, you could tell they were not used to like getting their voice out there. And I think about what's happening right now. This, some people would say like an assault on men, which I know some women wouldn't agree with that, but I mean, it kind of, you know, kind of is. Whether, you know, maybe some girls think that that's okay, but it kind of is, because you have toxic, like you just said, if we said toxic femininity, but we have toxic masculinity. I feel like right now words like the patriarchy, male privilege, just the mere fact of being born a male means that you are born with privilege, like this being pushed out. That's, even if I, you know, agreed with that, which, you know, I won't say that, but how could that not be hard on males? I mean, we say this for people of color, or we obviously say it about women, is that just by being born a certain way, we're being discriminated against, or we have these things said about us, or we have these assumptions made about us. I think this is what I'm starting to see with men, and it's weird. It's really weird.
You know, when you're a girl growing up, when we were girls growing up, if you ever heard that girls were weak, or you throw like a girl, you know, that those are the kind of mind games that led to feminists becoming feminists. Because I always think about how, especially right now with social media, and how connected we are on a device and so disconnected from real people, that we really need to think about the diet, the consumption of what you're putting into your brain, because that, you know, mental health is just as much, you know, just as important as any physical health or ailment that you may have, and we really need to protect our mental health. But I've been thinking a lot about this, how you need to, you need to be very selective about what you put into your brain, with what you follow, with what you spend time consuming, just like you would with what you eat. And, you know, I really like, you know, inspirational kind of motivational speakers. And I love to read things that, you know, educate me and give me a broader perspective on historical things or political things. But, you know, be careful about the, you know, the clickbait kind of outrage porn that is out there now, you know, to get people outraged. And so I think toxic masculinity, patriarchy, male privilege, those are damaging messages to especially be sending to young boys growing up, and also young girls. You know, if you're a young girl hearing that, you know, male privilege and that we need to smash the patriarchy, and there was like a onesie for babies where I think it was for baby boys, and it said, boys will be boys, but then the last boys was crossed out and it said good human beings. And this was trending for a while on Instagram, and a lot of big celebrities were posting this. And I was just thinking, like, okay, so you're putting a onesie on a baby saying boys will be good human beings, not boys, good human beings. And it's just like, it's
essentially saying you are inherently bad, so we're gonna try and make you a good person. Yeah. Because if we don't try to make you a good person, you're going to be bad because you're a male.
Yeah. And my husband and I remember growing up and having the boys are stupid, throw rocks at them, you know, thing on bags and T-shirts and everything. And that was really popular when I was in elementary school. I have no idea why. It's so stupid. But
why did we do anything at that age?
But, you know, now it's gone so much farther, I think, with this just open acceptance of male bashing, boy bashing, you know, dialogue, that it's okay, because it's okay to insult, offend, or put down the oppressors. And when you put people in a category, half of the population in the world in a category of being the oppressor, now you're more willing to diminish, discount, excuse the issues going on for them because they are part of the privileged class of people. So therefore we don't have to care about men getting, 63% more prison time for the same crime as a woman, also convicted of the same crime. Men get 63% longer sentences. So, well, it's okay because we're just trying to even things out because the oppressed are, or the oppressors are, the privileged.
Where did this come from, this fourth wave feminism that's happening right now? Because when I think back to, like, you know, what was the first wave, like the 1910s or something like that? I actually don't even know. It was like around the 1900s. Then, you know, that makes sense. The 60s, it makes sense. I actually didn't even know there was a little resurgence in like the 80s, 90s. I didn't even know that. But like, so now where is this, what is the feminist movement fighting for right now? I know they say equality, but what is exactly does that mean? Because I think there's a definitive objective in the other movements. What is it today?
That's a great question, because, you know, you'll often see feminists online say, oh, men's rights movement, ha ha ha, they have all their rights, what are they fighting for? It's actually the opposite. Women and Western civilizations do have all the equal rights that men have. And actually men are being denied certain rights that I do think are human rights issues, such as genital integrity, the consenting to, you know, a piece of your body being cut off, or, you know, father's rights, the right to know you are a father, the right to you know, only have a responsibility for someone who is actually your child, rather than all these issues we just talked about with father's rights. So, and then, you know, the all male selective service, which is now a recent development of being overturned. But it's actually men that have these issues that haven't been defined in the gender equality discussion, because feminism has been defining what is gender equality, what are our initiatives, what do we want to see changed.
Per Wikipedia,
Per Wikipedia,
they
define, establish, and achieve political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, except for, defining that men's issues are also part of the equality discussion. I think the biggest driving force, which now I'm just it's starting to make sense right now in this moment, click. The biggest issue, the fire they're fanning to get feminism to keep chugging along is the fear of a backlash or the fear of something being taken away. Because definitely one of the big feminist issues that keeps a lot of women, holding on to feminism right now is pro-choice, being for abortion rights. And, that I am pro-choice. I also think that's a very nuanced conversation too, that takes a lot of time to really dive into. But feminism definitely does warn women constantly that Planned Parenthood is under attack, that they're trying to take away women's right to have an abortion. Then I think also, oddly enough, the men's rights movement and kind of the growth of popularity of the movement and also awareness that there is this movement is yet another thing that's kind of helping feminism chug along right now, is the fear that this is the backlash to women's rights, that we need to be feminists and we need to say this on the, Oscar stage, and we need to talk about this in all of our Me Too and Time's Up campaigns, that there is this backlash, this fear, this
that they think is violent and promotes
that wants to take away women's rights when that isn't the case. Although there definitely is, kind of underground layers of the internet and forums that you can see anonymous posters, people posting online saying that, awful things about women, or saying that they shouldn't be able to work or to vote or own property or have an education. So the thing with that is they're anonymous. They have some kind of troll looking name. They're on, a encrypted website where you have no idea of knowing who they are. And I have found through making the red pill that this is a horrible part of reality today, that people will pose as the enemy and then say horrible things online to basically falsely accuse that group of saying stuff like that. I mean, we know about this with hoaxed hate crimes,
Wait, what do you mean? So they'll post... So for instance, say a radical feminist wants to show that men's rights activists are scumbags, so they will create I forget what you handle, Meninism or something like that, which isn't really a thing. But they'll use some kind of, tag to make it look like they're a men's rights activist. I see.
And then start saying stuff like, we need to, bash this woman in the head or whatever to falsely accuse the movement or the group of condoning that kind of behavior, which is really also interesting because Polly Lim with A Voice for Men would always remove comments that promoted violence and then talk about in a post why this is unacceptable. And this is a funny story too, that the mainstream media would then find his posts quoting the horrible comments that he says is unacceptable on his website, and they would use those comments to say, look at what men's rights activists say, when he was posting that to show what's unacceptable. I mean, there's so many political.
So I have to ask about that, the media coverage of all this. We talked a little bit about the aftermath of the release of your film, but I did want to ask you about your experience, because I feel like that's almost as much of the discussion of the red pill, not more than, but like just in addition to the actual film, is a reaction to it. Yeah. You talked about a couple interviews that you did that did not go well. What was the general press tour like?
Well, oh gosh. I want to just let you know that I hate talking about all this because it's so so much. And I feel like every time I talk about it, I haven't said everything. And then also pointing out all the misinformation for some reason has the, counter effect of then planting the seeds in people's minds that there is this there are these horrible things about me or the film out there online. And well, where there's smoke, there's fire. Maybe there's something to that. So it's this, I think it's a, kind of press warfare where if they want to take down a filmmaker or smear a film, a great thing to do is to put out all these lies out there where you constantly get them defending the truth, but then by looking defensive makes it look like they have something to hide.
There's a term for that. Is that called gaslighting? Is that what that is?
Maybe.
Maybe that's the wrong term, but I started hearing about this. Actually, I think I heard about it in regards to modern day feminism, in that, and maybe the Me Too movement, Brett Kavanaugh, all these cases of these guys that were accused, no evidence, this and that, and then getting angry, and then everyone essentially mobbing on them to say, no, you are, no, this is what you did, no, and like for them to essentially have no case of defense. I can't remember what the term was, but there's like a term for that.
Yeah. And that is why false accusations are so scary, because a false accusation, I believe, is remembered more by the public than what the actual outcome of that accusation was. So say the person was found innocent, it's actually more remembered that they were accused of something than that they were found innocent. So it's a really, scary, interesting, fascinating kind of thing, because you would think that we already went through this with the Salem witch trials, that, hey, maybe we shouldn't just burn people or drown them because they were accused of something. Maybe we should actually have a legal system to figure out what really happened. But now with social media, we are back to, and I know a lot of feminists think, oh, if anyone says that the Me Too movement is Salem witch trials, that is, the most misogynistic thing you could say to deflect from, all the victims of sexual abuse. No, we, obviously sexual assault is a very difficult, crime to convict, especially when so much time has also passed. But usually it's just a, he said, she said, or, one person said against another. And our legal system, I agree, isn't perfect, but we figured out, okay, what is the best to protect human rights? And we found that you should assume people are innocent until being proven guilty. And that may mean that guilty people walk free, but to protect the one innocent person from being wrongfully convicted.
And I think some women have actually come out and said they would prefer the opposite. I can't remember who it was, but some celebrity woman tweeted she would rather, she would be okay if during the Me Too movement, like a couple innocent men were convicted, vilified and ousted, if that meant that more guilty men would also be caught.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just begs the question, and I don't necessarily expect you to have an answer, but okay, well, what's the alternative? Because I saw that, I've seen this all over the place, but people saying, Brett Kavanaugh, this is where I saw this happening the most, saying like, well, he's not right. Like the, what's it called? Innocent before proven guilty. Due process. And they're like, well, due process doesn't matter here because it's a job interview. He's not on court. We're not trying to convict him. It's just to see if he is right for this high level position. And I thought, well, but the whole idea of due process, it's not just for legal purposes. I think it's also it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy. And is that a philosophy that we want to try for in our everyday lives or not? And if not, then what's a better system? And I think that's what I've yet to get an answer to. What is a better system than saying you need evidence?
Yeah.
And again, I don't expect you to necessarily have an answer, but
yeah, I think of it as, a virtue and principle of, our founding fathers and the, our Constitution and everything. This is why people want to come to America, is because we have these protections for individual rights. And we also have this idea of the American dream. And, that's Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. But, you know, the capitalism and the idea that you can pursue whatever direction you want to go in with, you know, hard work and a lot of luck. But, you know, due process is absolutely a tenet of our society that I deeply appreciate and value if I were put in that position. The thing is that vastly more men are in the position of having to defend their innocence, being wrongfully accused of something. And now with social media, it doesn't even have to go to court for that conversation and kind of public stoning to take place, which I think is one of the, you know, the biggest, I don't know, one of the biggest problems with the Me Too movement is that so much of this has happened on social media without all the facts or a proper defense for the person who's being accused. And, you know, I think for the movement to have truly been successful, it should have just stuck with going to law officials to analyze the cases more deeply.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on the Me Too movement, having been an actress?
Oh, well, you know, I knew this was going on in Hollywood. And that's the thing is I definitely think LA and the film industry is its own bubble with a lot of issues.
I say the exact same thing. It is not your typical industry.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I've always called it the Wild Wild West because there are no rules. And you know, if there's a director with a script and a lot of money, he can cast whatever leading starlet he wants, and he can pick however he wants to.
And there's a million of us, so he can... There's no reason for them to not choose their own method of casting.
And you know, and this is one of the areas that isn't really talked about, is that there are a lot of willing women to participate in that kind of exchange of power, sexual power for, you know, a career or a leading role in a big blockbuster film. And you know, I think it's just Hollywood is its own world. And, you know, I just, it is interesting though, because so we've had these huge stories like, you know, Catholic boys coming out against, you know, priests that were doing sexually horrible things, and then Penn State. And it did get a lot of media attention. It just didn't fit in with the, you know, feminist motivation of wanting to have a movement about sexual assault against women. And, you know, I wonder if maybe they came out at the same time, because the Me Too movement, the Cosby story started long before that, but then the Harvey Weinstein story was really what kicked off the Me Too movement. And then, you know, since then we've had 250 some mostly guys that have been accused of sexual assault from the Me Too movement.
It's 200. What did you say the number was?
It's like roughly 250 people. Very few women. Asia Gento was one of the women accused.
Accusing
and then accused. Yeah. So, you know, maybe if Penn State and all the different stories of, you know, boys that were being abused in different scenarios, if it came out at the same time, I wonder if the Me Too movement would have been more inclusive.
Would have jumped on that more, would have stuck a little bit more.
Well, and been inclusive in the dialogue that they use, that because if you look at how leaders of the Me Too movement and how the press talks about the Me Too movement, it's so gendered. It says, you know, women are breaking their silence against male perpetrators and horrible men in the entertainment industry and in news and all these different industries. And you know, it's not just women that are victims of this. And I think it would have been so much better for the movement to have been inclusive in how they talk about these issues. And also with, you know, LGBT rights, which I think feminism really has tried to embrace. Of course, you have, you know, the trans exclusionary radical feminists that don't want to accept men who are transitioning to women.
I'm so confused with the groups at this point.
There are different factions. But, you know, for the most part, I think feminism in the mainstream sense has embraced LGBTQI issues. So if that's the case, then why haven't they been gender inclusive in their dialogue about, you know, Me Too issues? Because certainly, you know, there are, you know, transgender people and there are men who are victims of this sort of thing. So, but I think feminism in general has taken the stance that we need to focus on men as the perpetrators. So for some reason, that also led into feminism not wanting to accept male victims, which I don't get, because I think we can have space in our compassion bank for caring about male victims and then also recognize female perpetrators.
Yeah. Well, and this makes me think of, I think for what was the hardest scene in your movie for me to get through was the section where you were talking about the media depictions disparity between how they depict female atrocity or like female victims throughout the world and male victims throughout the world. And you talk about the Boko Haram situation that happened a few years ago. And that was the hardest for me to get through when you're going through all the newspaper headlines of war fatalities. And, you know, I'll let you tell it. But that was crazy. That was probably the biggest eye opener for me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that. That was actually the first section of the film that I edited, was the Boko Haram section, just because it was such an aha moment for me. It really just encapsulated what the men's rights activists were saying, which is that there's this blind spot for male victims. And so what was happening with Boko Haram, and people can see the film to get a better version of the story than I'm about to tell. In Boko Haram, people may remember the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls campaign.
I posted it.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest successful hashtags for that time. Like it really was this widespread, you know, Hollywood was holding up those signs on the red carpet at, you know, film premieres.
Michelle Obama, I remember,
yeah,
was first lady at the time. And
yeah. And so, you know, all I knew about that was that I forget how many girls, I think it was around 200 girls were kidnapped by the terrorist group Boko Haram, and they were missing for months. And
in Nigeria, I think it was.
Yes, yeah. And so, you know, on first reading that is horrible. And yes, that is horrible. You know, who knows what atrocities those girls saw and were put through, and, you know, absolutely devastating. And, you know, I think in just the sense of raising awareness about that, good that we talked about it and had a worldwide conversation about that. I'm glad that, you know, that happened. It's just, you know, widening the blinders a little bit. We then see that for years there were boys, young boys, male students, that were being burned alive in the same villages and at their school by Boko Haram. And there was actually one small news story that never caught wind where they reported that the terrorists came into the school. There was, I think, one schoolhouse for girls and something like 4 for boys. And they told all the girls to go home, get married, you know, renounce your sins, and something else, you know, religious thing that was said to them. And then they burned the boys alive. And there was, Karen Strawn talks about this in my film. She's a men's rights activist. But she said there was no outrage. Where was the hashtag Bring Back Our Boys? But we can't, they're dead. And this was happening time and time and time and time again.
Yes, like when headlines.
It wasn't just like one instance or 3 instances. It was for years going on that boys all the time were being burned alive. And you would see them
in groups of hundreds of boys or thousands of boys. And then you look at the Boko Haram girl hashtag, which we all agree is a great thing to fight for. Right. But it was what, like 200-300 or something like that, a couple hundred, which is, you know, that many too many.
Yes.
But then with the boys, I mean, it's in the thousands and thousands. And if we put in war, and probably just worldwide, it's probably in the hundreds of thousands or millions.
And then it would be reported on by saying villagers or people rather than boys. Like deep within the article, you would then find that it was all, you know, boys aged from 15 to 19 years old that were burned alive. And it was just really shocking to find all this, because Karen Strawn told me about this in an interview, and then I went back and did all the research and found these news clippings and pieced it all together, which, you know, apparently definitely no filmmaker had done before, but, you know, there wasn't even one major press source to show this happening, and, you know, all kind of punched in together. And it was just mind blowing. And, you know, what I took away from that was realizing that we don't have compassion for boys being burned alive, or, you know, the press doesn't see it as being a, you know, money-making kind of article to talk about, you know, because the major news sources didn't report on this at all. So what took it from, you know, just a local news source reporting about the boys being burned alive, and then a local news source reporting on the girls being kidnapped, that launched it into the worldwide press with the hashtag in Hollywood and, you know, Michelle Obama and all this to talk about it. So what was that launch? There was some motivation to actually now talk about this worldwide.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but because you originally said that they let the girls go. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but was it when they found out that they weren't getting enough media attention from the boys, that's when they went back and kidnapped the girls? Is that what had happened?
Well, that's what Karen Strawn says. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think I couldn't find anything to
so that
support
might not
that
be
because,
true. Okay.
You know, I don't think Boko Haram reveals all their motivations online. But, you know, it worked. If that was their goal, it worked to get more media attention, doing something to the girls, not even killing them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who knows what would it have been different, if anything, if the girls were just burned alive alongside the boys? Would that have been a different story? I have no idea. But, you know, and then Karen Strawn in the documentary, The Red Pill, she says, and I still, this kind of makes my stomach turn because it's just the language I can't get behind, but she says that Boko Haram, they're chivalrous. And I'm like, oh. But in the film, in my documentary, she says they're chivalrous. They didn't kill the girls. They told them to go home, renounce your sins, get married. They burned the boys alive. And then they kidnapped them many years later and got all this media attention. And so that was interesting because, you know, chivalry is, you think of opening doors and, you know, paying for the bill.
Not murdering.
To spare your life because you're a girl.
Well, and the word I think of when you were going over all of this stuff is dispensable.
Mm. Yeah.
And I would say that might be the biggest takeaway I took away from the Red Pill, is that how we as a society and media, whether we realize it or not, how we probably do look at males as being more dispensable than females. I think one of the MRAs said in your film something like, the case can be made that we value men's work more than women's work, but we value women's lives more than we value men's lives.
Yeah.
You know, the cliche, like women and children first. And I think it's true to an extent.
Well, we're the bearers of life, you know. I think there is a lot of power in our reproductive abilities. And, okay, this is kind of one of my, like, I wonder, conspiratorially speaking, is that a word? Maybe. I wonder what is going to happen for female privilege, because I do believe that we have our own unique privileges. What is going to happen for female privilege when we have reproductive technology taking over, where people can have children without sex ever taking place? And whether it be, you know, IVF or now they're developing artificial wombs where women won't even have to carry the child themselves. I mean, we already have surrogacy as an option. So there are women that can, you know, elect that I will be the bearer for the women who don't want to or can't bear themselves. But when we start adding all these new technologies on how to have children without sex ever taking place, I wonder what's going to change. And, you know, are we just going to be an androgynous society where all women are just more working men? You know, I think a lot of our privileges do come with protecting women in the case of being pregnant. So, you know, for instance, like not having women a part of selective service or the draft in the case that, you know, you don't want to put them in a situation where they become infertile. Or
from war?
Yeah, with, you know, I can't really talk about it, but you know, testing things on them and
what,
you know,
what do you mean? Testing things on them?
Well, you know, soldiers do put their bodies up for experiment.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
It's kind of a whole other thing. I'm not even talking about
that. But, you know, basically, I think women's health, we do need to protect women's health for the, you know, the child they may bear and raise and bring up in the world. And even, I mean, gosh, I'm going to sound like so crazy woo-woo, but, you know, I've been looking into like EMF and, you know, radiation and how that can impact your health. And I think there's a lot that we still don't know about the impact technology has on women's health. So, you know, we have been protecting women's health for natural childbearing. So, you know, that's why you see on so many bottles, do not take if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. You know, that's trying to take care of the baby you're growing. And so, you know, I think women have been protected from also a lot of jobs that could be too dangerous. I have a family member who is in chemistry and biology, and she's constantly around very toxic materials. And so she was telling me that, you know, when she decides to start having a family, she's going to have to do something else because she's constantly breathing in these very dangerous fumes and putting herself in a very bad scenario if she were pregnant. So, you know, I think we need to talk about that. You know, we need to think about all that as women, how we're protecting our bodies. But then also, you know, scientists are trying to figure out, well, maybe we don't have to care about women's health because we can have this artificial reproduction type of scenario where it doesn't matter how a woman's health is. Where, I mean, to go really extreme, if people want to go down rabbit holes, I mean, some people theorize that you can create an embryo from a skin cell.
What?
That's a skin cell. You can create an embryo off a model by scratching them.
They haven't actually done that before.
No. But there are scientists that believe that eventually this could be a real thing. So now you have...
Oh my gosh, I feel like that would just be a disaster.
I'm sorry, not an embryo, an egg, and then so then get a sperm donor. Now you have IVF, artificial conception, and then you can have either a surrogate or you can have an artificial womb, and now pods create people. So are women just going to become more men in suits, you know, working?
Right.
And then, God, I'm sounding like I'm really not a conspiracist. I swear I'm not, but I'm really into
it does bring up the
technology.
I mean, look, this is the whole point of what we try to do on the show is we think that we need to have all the ideas out there, all the conversations out there, and then people can do with it what they will. Yes. So I think that is an interesting question on, okay, well, is this value and overprotection of women, does the fact that we bear children have to do with that? Okay, well, that's interesting. And if that changes, well, that's interesting too. What that means, I have no idea. I don't think you do either. But it's an interesting idea. I mean, back to what we were talking about with like dangerous jobs, I think that's a fair argument to say that, well, maybe women, it's fair for us to second guess doing certain jobs because of just that, working with chemicals or whatever it is, because of if we want to have babies in our reproductive systems. I think that's fair to just have that out there. I mean, there's something going on right now. I have no idea what it is, but I feel like infertility rates are rising. I mean, we were just talking about that. I didn't even know. Apparently in men it is too.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
I don't know for sure. I don't think anyone knows for sure. There's a lot of theories, but yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's interesting because that's a part of us that it's just there. Like it's just a part of our lives and our decision making that we just can't.
Yeah.
We just have to live with. It just is. So, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think of other men's issues, because there were just so many of them. But I mean, I think we went over a ton of them, actually. And I don't think I've asked you yet, but have you, forgive me if I did ask you, I don't think I did. Have you talked with any feminists about what it was specifically in the film that they were against? The ones that were like angry with it and protesting it? And
I think the general feminist attack of the film is that it doesn't present feminism well. And, you know, that's perplexing to me, because it's, you know, it's the only film ever made on men's issues, men's rights. Thousands of documentaries about feminism. We don't hear people writing in hate mail saying, where do you talk about men's issues in your film? But, you know, it's a 2-hour film. I cut out a lot that I wanted to include. And I had to be really selective about how, you know, what's most important to cover. And I still didn't cover everything. I mean, I don't even talk about false accusations, which is a huge thing. I mean, I talk about briefly how rape culture got me down the rabbit hole, but never really go back to that to analyze that, because that's really a whole huge thing that is very nuanced, and I don't even know what, you know, how I could have included that. But, you know, I think basically the critique of the film itself for people who've watched it, that's the key thing, is people who've watched it, is that it doesn't present feminism well enough. And, you know, it's also interesting to me because, so I sent out an email thread while I was making the Red Pill movie to a lot of feminist contacts that I had, asking who would be the best people to speak to regarding the men's rights movement, but feminist perspectives. So who would be the best feminist to speak to? So I actually had, and this was like one of the, you know, at the time, one of the best days of my life, I had Gloria Steinem respond directly. And she told me, you should talk to Dr. Michael Kimmel. Michael Kimmel is the best resource. He's done a lot of research on the men's rights movement. He's a feminist professor.
He's the one in your film,
Brook.
right?
Yes. And she gave me his contact. And then, of course, you know, my response is, can I interview you? And then she said, no, I'm too busy right now. Sorry. And I'm like, oh, I was so upset. But I did. I was in contact with her. And that was, you know, being a feminist at the time, I was like talking to the Pope, you know. So I interviewed Michael Kimmel, and he speaks in the film. And gosh, a lot of interesting stuff has happened since then, because so I interview a few feminists. We have some feminist protesters that talk in the film. One of my feminist friends who was pregnant at the time, I talked to her. Then we have Catherine Spiller, who's the executive editor of Ms. Magazine and a part of the Feminist Majority Foundation, you know, a big wig feminist. She speaks, and then Michael Kimmel, who was directly recommended to me by Gloria Steinem. So for feminists to say I didn't interview the right feminists, it's like, you know, first of all.
Is that what they say? You didn't interview
Yeah,
the right
some of them would say I didn't interview the right feminists, which, you know, it's like, well, I interviewed feminists, you know, I didn't have to, you know, but I did bring their perspective in there, mainly because I was struggling with my own feminist views, and I wanted to understand what the counter would be, and quickly realized that a lot of feminists hadn't really formulated their counter to the men's rights movement, because they had been, you know, dismissing them so much, thinking no one's ever going to ask us the direct questions about what they say, because we're just going to put them in this other category that we'll never have a real conversation about, you know, what men's rights activists are saying.
I was actually wondering that, because I was like, I wonder when in the filmmaking process Cassie interviewed these feminists, because who knows, maybe she interviewed them first and they didn't totally know, I don't know what was going on. Or if they were counter interviews, that's very interesting, because the responses were not very, from what I saw from the end product, satisfactory for me anyway, wanting to hear the other side. Like, okay, great, we've heard this men's rights activist side, great. What's the feminist response to that? And there wasn't really one.
Yeah, and that was the tone and takeaway of my interviews with the feminists that I had, was they hadn't done enough research into what the men's rights activists were saying, or even had talked to men's rights activists to know what their perspective was, to figure out what their counter argument would be. So that's also partly why I released what I call the Red Pill Raw Files on my YouTube channel, so that people who want to see the fuller length versions of the interviews that weren't edited down for the film, they can go to my YouTube channel and see the longer, full interviews to see if,
that's nice of you to do.
Yeah, like, challenge me. If you think I did creative editing to make someone look bad, watch the raw interview and tell me, how did I misrepresent them?
I wish everyone would do that.
I know. So, and I was disappointed interviewing feminists that they hadn't done more research. But also at the time, it was 2013, 2014. They really thought that men's movement was just a cockroach that was, cockroach, never die. But they thought it was this thing in the corner that they could just dismiss and, put a rug over and hope that no one would bring up. And so, I think, in general, they just wanted to stick with they're the misogynist, they're violent, they want to turn back the clock on women's rights. And I didn't find any of those things to be true. And then of the issues, I didn't, actually the responses I got from a lot of feminists were very hypocritical. Because, for instance, Catherine Spiller in one of the Raw Files, I asked her, what's your take on how men don't really have a choice when a woman decides she wants to have an abortion? What do you think? What should we think of that? What should we make of that? And she said, well, they should have thought of that before they had sex. And that's the same argument that pro-lifers would use against abortion is, if a pro-choice person says that, well, maybe she wasn't ready to. Yeah. She said they should have thought about that before they had sex and had a conversation with the woman before they had sex, but not after the fact. After the fact, it's, your control is out of your hands.
But if say a pro-lifer were to say that about the woman, they would be up in arms about that.
Right. Because a feminist would say, that she should, if she's not ready to be a mom, she should have the right to abort, or not ready to give birth. And, a pro-lifer would say, well, they should have just thought of that before they had sex. So, those kind of responses and rebuttals were a huge letdown, and definitely part of the reason why I dropped the label feminist, because probably the number one reason I dropped the label of feminist was because of the hypocrisy that I was seeing within feminism regarding men's issues and the broader perspective. But, I still stand for women's rights. Yeah.
You also say that you say you're not a feminist anymore, but you're also not a men's rights activist.
Right.
And why is that?
Oh, that's a good question. In some ways, I do think the movement has blinders on for men's issues, although I think they have more of an understanding of what women experience and what women's issues are, because the mainstream, culture talks so much about it that it's impossible to not hear what women's issues are today. It's so bombarded in, social media and the news and films. So, but I think they are still, they're focused on men's issues, and I don't blame them for that. Someone has to be, because, we need people to work on those issues, those lawsuits that really are problematic. And, but, that's not my fight. And, I think as far as my charity work for men's issues, I think the Red Pill film did start a very big discussion about men's issues that needed to take place, and I'm so happy that that's what it did. I hope people weren't harmed in the process. I've heard of people that broke up their marriages and stuff.
Oh, good.
I know, it's just because it's hard to be really close to someone who, is going to dig their heels in for one side, and then the other person's views start to change. And if you're not open and willing to hear how their views have changed or why they've changed, it's hard. I've lost friendships in the film. And
you have? I don't know if you feel comfortable asking, but I was wondering about your feminist friend in the film.
Yeah.
How did she respond to the film?
Oh my gosh, lovely.
Good.
She So I interviewed her when she was pregnant, and that was in 2013. And then, I was still filming The Red Pill, so I was constantly traveling. We weren't keeping in touch a lot. We don't live in the same town, so I hadn't seen her in a while. But every time I would check in with her, she was going down her own researching rabbit hole because of all the questions that I asked her about the men's rights movement and of these issues. To a lot of it, she didn't know what her position was or had never heard of these issues. So then she started researching on her own, and she was a feminist writer, author, journalist, so she's already a very, inquisitive person. So she went down her own rabbit hole without me, learning about men's issues and this kind of, whatever you want to call it, the woke community or whatever. And, basically we kind of both found ourselves in a very similar spot with our views. Yeah. Because, even though one of the worst reviews that the film ever got, and it was the first review the film ever got.
Oh, jeez.
I know, it just started the ball rolling.
At least it was just uphill from there.
Yeah, well, I don't know. But it was in The Village Voice by a author named Alan Scherstl. And it was just horrible, horrible, horrible review. And not fair at all. Like, I wish I could see a review from him of a feminist film to see if he was actually being fair to the filmmaking process and the directing process, or if it was strictly a political vendetta against me. But he started the ball rolling, and gosh, what? I'm so sorry. We were talking about
your friend and you two going through this like feminist transformation. Yeah. And
oh yes, so his title of the article was The Red Pill. What was it? Or maybe it was You Cannot Unsee the Red Pill. And something like that. You cannot unsee the red pill. And as awful as the review was, the title I was very pleased with.
That's actually not a bad title. Yeah, I was like, that could actually be a good review.
Yeah, I was very pleased with it because I was like, yeah, that's true. You cannot unsee it, because when you learn about the different men's issues and you start to see hypocrisy within what claims to be the gender equality movement not being inclusive of male victims, you cannot unsee it. You cannot unlearn this information. And, it's just the more and more time goes by, you see these little red pills popping, and I think that's what happened with my feminist friend, was she started to hear about this. She started to do some research, and then the more and more years went by, you can't deny something strange is going on. And
but you say that wasn't the case with all your friends?
No. One of my friends went to a screening of the film to support me, and she brought her boyfriend, and they broke up, I think, that night, maybe the next morning. She called me the next day telling me what happened. She was really upset about the film.
Why did they break up?
Because he liked the film. But she was my friend. And she invited him because her friend was the filmmaker. Yeah, so, and we haven't, been the same since.
How has it been for you trying to have this conversation with the film? And I ask... it's kind of a personal question on my part, because I've had similar revelation, and the times I've tried, I haven't even had this conversation yet with anyone. The times I've tried to have this conversation has been immediately met with hostility. So I think I just kind of stop before I lose all my friends. Yeah. So how have you navigated that? Do you feel like, I don't know. How have you navigated it?
God, to be very honest, and this isn't going to be encouraging to you at all, I'm sorry. But basically, I just don't talk to my personal contacts about the film or what I've learned unless I know they're open-minded and they kind of get it. And, thank goodness my husband got it, because he and we were dating for 2 years. I was a feminist. And then I started making the red pill. So I went on this whole transition while being with him. And he grew up in Berkeley, or in East Bay, Northern California. And, he grew up feminist. And so luckily he was learning all this with me and stuck with me and understood where I was coming from. And luckily, my mother was the same. She was my producer on the film. And she, called herself feminist and started to learn about these issues with me. And we both started to shift kind of get together. I hope she's okay with me saying this, but my sister took a lot longer. She was very uncomfortable about the whole idea of me and my mom making this film, and had a really tough time, I think. And now is starting to really, she's a few years behind me and my mom as far as when our journey down the rabbit hole started, but she's now like, fallen with us. So, but I do have some family members and some friends that I just don't talk about it, and I think they've also determined to not talk about it. Some of them have decided to bombard me with every counter article they see or tweet or anything they read. If the New York Post writes something, or Washington Post or New York Times, they'll immediately send it to me. And it's interesting because, I was a feminist before a lot of them considered themselves feminists. And
so you're like, yes, thank you, I know. Yeah. I read this when it first came out, thank you.
Yeah. And, and I never sent them all these kind of articles and things to try to convince them back when I was a feminist and they weren't. But, I think it just made a lot of them uncomfortable that I made the red pill. And luckily a lot of them stuck with me and still came to my wedding. Even though I know, they didn't like the film. And, but, I don't know. The red pill isn't all of me, it's definitely a huge part of, the work that I've contributed to the world. And probably it is the proudest thing I've ever done. Absolutely. But, I just have to find other commonalities with my friends and family that don't like the film.
Yeah, that's kind of where I've gotten to, is if I feel like there's not a good reaction to it, I kind of just have dropped it, which sucks because you want to be able to lean on your friends when you're dealing with stuff or you have questions about life things, but whatever, friendships, relationships change, I guess. And then to your point, it's strengthened some as well. The last question about the red pill that I have is, after watching the movie, I feel like what I saw was feminists and men's rights activists fighting for so many gender issues that seem to overlap in a lot of ways. Yeah. Why aren't feminists and men's rights activists working together?
Oh, that is the age-old question. That's something I asked myself a lot during making the film and never really got a good answer. I do think that feminism has excluded men's rights activists and men's issues from the discussion purposefully, with the idea that, well, they're the privileged, they already have all the power. And so the feminist view is that men are already up here, women are down here, we're trying to work on our issues, and then we can start talking about men's issues and women's issues together. So that's, I think, how they, excuse not working with men's rights activists or not including their issues in the discussion. Where I've come to land with my views is that I do think that we can work on all of them at the same time. We probably should talk about them at the same time, because if working on women's issues does in some way harm or take away something from men and men's issues or men's rights, and I know a lot of feminists would, that's what they accuse men's rights activists of doing, is that men's rights activists fear that working on women's issues will take something away from men, and feminists insist that won't happen. Maybe it could. If you're talking about custody battles and family rights, and if we're talking about what women really want to have happen and the rights and reproductive, options, we probably should talk about the other players in that field, you know, because it could have a direct effect. A lot of men's rights activists have told me that feminist lobbyists have fought consistently for primary custody. And there's some feminist quotes that that children are a bargaining chip in child custody battles, and that you need to retain primary custody of the children to basically get the better end of the deal.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, really horrible stuff. And so, you know, I think we should talk about it all together at the same time. You know, I even talking about, it's just to throw out another issue that maybe we should talk about men's issues at the same time of women's issues. With the all-male selective service and the draft, I've asked some soldiers, what would you think of women being drafted into combat or drafted into war? And there are a lot of guys that don't like the idea of having women in combat because they're still very chivalrous and they want to protect women, go out of their way. And, you know, also you can argue about strength and, you know, if there's a wounded male soldier who's a big guy, you know, you need another soldier that can carry that weight to take him to safety. And
well, I know that conversation comes up with like firefighters and female police officers and whatnot. And I don't know if the standards have been lowered to get more women in, but, you know, I'm always like, I mean, hey, if they meet the standards, they meet the standards. If they meet the physical requirements, they meet the physical requirements. But if we're talking about lowering them to allow more women in, or, you know, whatever the situation is, I think that's a conversation that needs to be had.
yeah, and I have heard that they've lowered the standards for, at least in the military. So, you know, as far as, can we talk about men's issues and work towards men's issues at the same time as women's issues? Yeah, I do see that there's a lot of gray area because compassion isn't finite. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game for compassion, but resources and funding is finite, you know, in certain scenarios. I mean, there is, if someone's going to open their wallet and they only have X amount of dollars to donate to a cause, maybe having, you know, a different gender equality movement that's separate from the feminist movement could, you know, affect what feminism is, or feminist groups are trying to do for women's issues. So, you know, it's something we have to consider everything, and it's all gray area, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think, you know, ultimately we should have multiple perspectives at the table to raise, you know, the points that need to be had. Feminists always say that we need women at the boardroom tables because women do bring a unique perspective. I think we also need, you know, men's rights activists at the table for gender equality discussions. If it's a majority of feminists, we should have an alternate perspective there to just bring a little counterbalance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
a lot.
so this film took up, you said since 2013,
13.
So 6 years?
6 years now.
6 years of your life.
Yeah.
What have you been up to since the press and the release of this film kind of winded down?
How much time do we have?
All the time in the wind, no time limit.
Oh my gosh.
This is the internet.
Okay, so I released the film in a limited theatrical release in fall of 16? And then it had a worldwide release in March 2017, so VOD, video on demand platforms. People can still see it, Amazon Prime, iTunes, YouTube, Vudu, Google Play. Gotta get that.
Yeah.
And so what have I done since the worldwide release? Well, I've done a lot of, you know, first of all, I'd like to say I've never sought out an interview or press at all.
Really?
I've never put anything out asking.
That's nice.
At least not since the release of the film. During the Kickstarter, I did ask, like, hey, can you help me with my Kickstarter? But no, since the release of the film, I've never. So every interview I've done, and I've done a ton of them, they all approached me and asked me to be here and there and everywhere. And the Australia trip was the press tour I was invited on. And we did tons of community screenings where people would purchase a screening license and host a screening in their own town or country. And worldwide, we've had screenings everywhere from currently one happening in Japan in May. But we've had screenings in Oslo and just all over Europe and even in Africa. And
wow,
definitely. But the biggest territories that we've had press and screenings is Canada, Australia, and the UK. America, interestingly enough, I do think that there's some kind of gag order that's, telling the press to like, hey, don't look that way, don't write about that. Let's just try to hope that it disappears.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. But, still people hear about it. So, it's still, I know a lot of people in the U.S. have seen it. So, the press took forever. It's still going, obviously. So now 2 years after the film's worldwide release, I'm still doing press, still trying to, manage running a production company as basically just myself and my husband and a couple of help here and there. And I had so many people kind of blindly submitting, ideas for documentaries for whatever's next, and had so many great ideas thrown at me and considered all of them. I mean, I seriously considered probably, a good dozen documentary topics. And so I thought, I'd be starting a new feature by now. But just kind of give you like a rundown of the past year, because this is when I've really kind of gone off the map. I've been avoiding social media.
Good for you.
It's too much.
I feel like we've just been getting on social media and we are like, whoa.
Yeah.
This is intense. Twitter in particular, like, wow.
Yeah. And I do think that there's like a very concerted, campaign to try to bully me off Twitter, which has kind of worked.
Really?
Yeah, just, people who want to get me down, that always tag me in their posts that are, horrible about me or the film. And it's just constant, like, so I'll avoid Twitter for weeks on end and then log in to see what's up. And then it's just hundreds of these, people who are trying to.
Have you ever thought about reporting harassment? I just saw this big thing. I would think it was like Joe Rogan's podcast with Tim Pool and Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, and then someone else from Twitter. And that was the entire episode, was them talking about who they decide to ban or censor or not, and harassment. And they were saying their whole thing is trying to prevent people from getting harassed. So I don't know if your case would qualify for that, if it helped your experience online. But anyway.
It's so interesting because, I do think that sometimes complaining about harassment and death threats and all that goes a little too far, where people are just kind of, just disagreeing with someone on Twitter that can then be reported as harassment. And there was a case in Canada. I think it was like Elliot Scott. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name now. But he was banned from using his computer for I think like over a year because he was arguing, like debating with feminists on Twitter, and he lost not only his Twitter account but also usage of going online.
He lost his ability to go online?
Yes.
The Canadian government prevented him from going online for a year.
Gosh, I'm trying to remember his name. What was it? Gosh, I'm so sorry. But I don't even know what you would Google to find it. I want to say Elliot Scott something. But anyways, this was going on, I think, around 2016, I want to say. Maybe 2017, but he was just debating with feminists on Twitter. And he also worked in, I think, graphic design. So he lost work for
because that's all online.
Yeah. So, that was a case of feminists who believed that they were being harassed because a men's rights advocate was debating with them. And, I think the ruling was not right. So I haven't reported harassment just because, I don't know, I just don't want it to go too far. A lot of people upset me and online, but I don't want to, start crying wolf and.
Well, if it is really bad.
Yeah.
But
and we did have one death threat of, of a screening in, I think it was Australia, where someone tweeted saying that they were going to shoot up the theater like Batman movie premiere style. And so the government looked into that, and they couldn't figure out who it was. Or
what is with Australia? I had no idea Australia was so hostile.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I can speak about it. But anywho, so this past year I've been off social media a lot, and it just became too much. And I think, the best way for me to express myself is through filmmaking, and that's what I want to, get back into. But so, right now we're in 2019 already. June 2018, I got married after 7 years of being with a guy. So about time. Thank you. It was a great wedding, wonderful. And then we went on a little honeymoon / work trip. In July, we went to the UK. And then August, we adopted 2 kittens. Wonderful, Gigi and Dinah. Miss them already. And then September, I ended up finally, all right, have a new project. I'm going to work on a new feature documentary. My mom, who's produced all my feature films with me, we just went to the drawing board literally and thought up this really complicated, philosophical, heady, cerebral documentary that we're starting pre-production on in that month in September. And then October rolls around, October 8th, and my husband and I find out we're pregnant. And it was, so joyous and everything. Spoiler, not pregnant now. So what ended up happening was I had a month of just pregnancy bliss. I was so happy. So I found I was pregnant at 4 weeks. And so 5 weeks ago, I'm making the nursery already, decluttering. 6 weeks, I'm getting my first prenatal appointment, and I'm just totally starry-eyed and so excited, and end up telling my family so that we can start planning the new documentary around me being pregnant. 7 weeks comes around, I'm realizing that I'm probably not going to be doing the travel that I had planned, because I was going to be speaking at a conference in Ohio about campus equality, and I was going to be right at the 9-week mark of my pregnancy, which apparently is when your symptoms are really horrible. So throwing up, nausea, and fatigue and everything. And I was already experiencing a lot of really bad symptoms. And then around the 7-week mark, I'm going to get graphic if you don't mind.
That's okay.
So, I start spotting, and some women who are pregnant, that's just what they experience, and it's no big deal. But I told my doctors, and they brought me in for my first ultrasound. And, I was pretty far along by that point, and all they could see was a gestational sac. They hadn't seen the yolk sac yet, which is going to show where the baby would grow. And they're like, okay, well, we need to figure out where your baby's growing right now, because we don't see it in your uterus. But your HCG levels, which is your hormone, your pregnancy hormone, is high enough where we should be seeing it by now. So this could be alarming. It could be in your fallopian tube, which is potentially life-threatening, because if it grows in your fallopian tube, this is called ectopic pregnancy. It could rupture. You could die. Definitely lose your fallopian tube. So they put me on, high-risk pregnancy watch. And then I kept going to my new ultrasounds. My HCG levels kept rising. They still couldn't figure out where the baby was. By the time when we should have been hearing the heartbeat, we weren't. And it just became basically a month of just tons of doctor's appointments, 2 ER visits from pain and not knowing where the pregnancy was, and knowing that that could be life-threatening, and tons of ultrasounds and tons of blood work, which was my least favorite thing of all of it. And it just became about a month of these doctor's visits and, panic and sadness and grief. And because I'm a documentarian, I knew I wanted to document my pregnancy, and I started documenting it right when we found out, and I was telling my family, and, so all the good stuff, all the happy memories were documented. And so when I started the process of miscarrying, I just kept documenting. So long story short, my miscarriage happened between 8 and 12 weeks. So it was that long. It took that long to finally, for my body to naturally purge the pregnancy, and just, it's basically like a home birthing experience, which is really shocking. See, all this stuff I never knew because I just never asked those kind of questions or met anyone who had had a miscarriage. And I'm 32 years old, and I didn't expect that I would be high risk for that. You're not just automatically high risk for being 32 years old, but your risk does increase as you age. And so all this, even just the happy pregnancy part, was a learning experience for me. So then to learn about the miscarriage part was really eye-opening and really scary. And, my heart just goes out to, oh my God, every single woman that has pregnancy loss, like at different stages too. So ever since mine, I've been fairly open with people I know, one-on-one, talking about what happened, because it's a part of me. It definitely affected me, and it happened. But this is my first time sharing it on camera, so thanks for being an open ear. So I've learned that it's actually really common for all doctor-confirmed pregnancies. 1 in 5 end in miscarriage. And so to have a doctor-confirmed pregnancy, you're already, have your first prenatal appointment, and you're pretty far along. So there are tons of more miscarriages that happen before you even know you're pregnant. But I think when you're trying to conceive, you're wanting the family, you're wanting the baby, and you're going through, all the steps to make the baby as healthy and happy as possible. And, I quit coffee, and which is like the hardest thing for me, because I don't want to, I know there's conflicting information about that, but, I just didn't want to do anything to hurt my baby. And so I quit coffee, which was the hardest, drug withdrawal kind of, and then it just, eating better and your health, and also, canceling work because my symptoms were really bad. And I don't know, if I had a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, I don't know how I could have been at work for that time, for that whole, not even from just the physical trauma, which was intense, but the emotional, I was out of civilization for that month dealing with all this, and you're just paralyzed in your own grief. And so when you ask me what I've been up to, so by Thanksgiving in November, I was finally not pregnant anymore, and went through the holidays and trying to figure out, okay, what's next? And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to go back to the film that I was working on in September. I thought I'm just going to jump right back into this topic. And then I just started, having these big life questions, and realizing, oh, I am 32. I'm turning 33 in May. I just got married. I do want a family. And I didn't always know I wanted a family. I thought I would always just be happy being a career woman, but
that's what I thought.
And, I proudly said to my friends growing up in high school that I was never going to have kids. And they're like, oh, your mind will change. And I was like, no. And then, of course, but I think why, because people who choose to be childless do wonder, like, why do you want to do that? And for me, my family is just the best thing in my world, and including my husband, but in my parents, my sister, my niece and nephew. And so I think it's more of, as selfish as it sounds, it's like an investment in your future. Because, my mom's now a grandma, and to my niece and nephew, and, her father's gone, her mother has Alzheimer's, and, it's just as you age, there will be a time when you will be the oldest person of your family. I do want a family, and I think my husband would be a great dad. And I just don't know if it'll be in the cards for me. I may never be able to, but I at least want to exhaust all the options to see if it is in the cards. I know I also have an uphill battle with a few things. Of course, I think every woman who has a miscarriage inevitably goes into, their memory and like, okay, what did I do to cause this? What about my health? Or what, was I too stressed? Or did I? And I really have listed out all the things, and maybe some of them are accurate. Maybe it was being too stressed and being a workaholic and sacrificing my health to make this last film, a lot of times. Or endometriosis runs in my family. My grandma had it. They had full hysterectomies by the time they were 40.
What exactly is that, endometriosis? I know I've heard of it. I don't actually know what it is.
So endometriosis I hope I say this correctly. It's a bleeding disorder for women during their menstrual cycle, and it's basically where the lining of your uterus also develops on the outside of the uterus, and so you develop these blood clots. And so every menstrual cycle you have, it gets worse and worse and worse. And while I was in the hospital for my miscarriage, they did find a endometrioma on my left ovary, although that wouldn't have caused the miscarriage, but it could make it more difficult for me to get pregnant in the future. So I have that kind of looming over me as telling me that maybe my window is shorter than the average woman. And, for some odd reason, I really want to try to do it naturally. I don't want to, and maybe my mind will change eventually or maybe not. But right now, I just, if I can conceive and have a baby naturally, I want to do it that way. If we can't, then we're definitely open to adoption. I know there's other options. There's egg freezing and there's IVF and surrogacy and all the other things. But so when I ask these big life questions, maybe it's the holidays that does that to you. Like, where are you going with your life?
Yeah, that's what they always say. If your life is great during the holidays are great. But if you're going through something during the holidays, it's actually really not a great time.
It's a good time to reevaluate your trajectory. And I just realized that, maybe I have a short window for the ability to have my own child. And so I decided, a really, really hard decision. I decided to put that feature documentary that we were developing on the shelf for now. And what I've actually been pouring my energy and passion into is working on, at this point, what I think will be a mini documentary about miscarriage, about my experience at least. And the reason I decided that was because there was a period called waiting to miscarry, where the doctor tells you you're going to miscarry, but it hasn't happened yet. And they give you the option of either having what's called a DNC, which is an abortion, or miscarrying naturally, which is basically this kind of home birthing experience. So I decided to try to do it naturally, and they told me if I don't miscarry naturally, then they'll have to bring me in for a DNC. And it was really odd kind of learning that it goes on your medical record as an abortion. I just thought that was kind of weird, because it's not like, I always thought of an abortion as you elect to, you're not ready to be a parent, but this is a case where you really wanted it. And so I wanted to miscarry naturally. So they sent me home. They told me they still didn't know where it was. So I was still high risk for ectopic pregnancy, of it being in the fallopian tube. So they just told me, if you have any, major pain, go to the ER. But so I went home and I had this period of waiting to miscarry. And what I did was I went on YouTube and I wanted to watch every video I could about miscarriage to know what to expect, because I basically felt like I was waiting for this massive storm to happen and I had no idea what to expect. And all I can find, there were a lot of videos, but all that I could find was women reflecting on their miscarriage and doing their best with their memory to try to describe what it was like, kind of like I'm doing now. And what I couldn't find was a real life documentation of the journey, of the process. And I knew I had that with all my video diaries. And I've been making video diaries since I was, I think, 18. So, this is nothing new to me. I wasn't planning on making a miscarriage documentary. Yeah. By a certain point, I knew that I should just follow through and document everything in the case that something could come of this. But so what I hope my mini documentary does is it's something that women who are waiting to miscarry, that they can watch to know what to expect, whether it's, the medical implications, the physical impact, and also the emotional experience, which is definitely a roller coaster. And I definitely went through all the stages of grief, from anger to bargaining to denial. And so I've been working on editing that for a little bit, and I don't know what's going to come of it. I think it's become something bigger than I initially set out to make. But right now it's a passion project that I just need to get out of me, just like a singer or songwriter needs to write that song to be able to move on. So I know that, probably a lot of my fans or followers from the Red Pill are not going to have any interest in seeing this film, which they probably shouldn't. I unless you're going through it or trying to help someone going through it, I don't think you should probably watch it, because it's going to be graphic, it's going to be long. It's really raw, and I think the reason why I'm kind of willing to let myself be the guinea pig for this is because I've already kind of made my life this very transparent, open for stonings. I don't have a job to protect at this point, or a reputation even to protect anymore.
Oh, yes, you do.
Well,
no, but you've been dragged through the coals. Is that how the saying goes? You've been through it.
Yeah, and so I feel like I can be riskier because I've already risked a lot, and basically I have nothing to lose by doing this. I don't think I have anything to lose, and I do think it will help people. So I'm going to release it. We'll see where it goes, but I don't know how long it will take to finish. And then once that's that, then we'll move on. My husband and I we're going to wait a little while to start trying again, because it takes a while to regulate your body. And then we'll see. But I think I have some more films in me beyond this, so I don't think it's the end for me. But,
yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's such a brave thing of you to turn this into an actual film, because it's so vulnerable, it's so painful, and it's something that so many women are going through. I know that personally. Fortunately not me, but like a lot of my friends are going through or have dealt with miscarriages in the last couple of years. I think we're all about the same age, or are dealing with it right now. Like more than I wish would happen. I wish none of them were happening, but I think something like this is really, really relevant for our generation of women. Any woman going through a miscarriage. So I think that's really great. And to turn something like something so personal and painful into something that I think can help a lot of women, I think, thank you. Thank you. I can't imagine how hard that must be.
I do agree with you that I think it'll sadly become more and more relevant, because there is a rise in infertility, and women are waiting later and later to have children, which I actually think is a great thing, because, well, I'm not going to say it black and white like that, because I think, I don't know, there's room for everyone. But for me personally, having what I do actually view as a successful career in documentary filmmaking, which is a really hard space to be successful in, it's given me so much confidence to have so many supporters and people who appreciate the work that I've made, and to also be very proud of the work that I've done. And And so I think, you know, women who want to have a career before having a family, absolutely. I was rereading The Feminine Mystique a couple weeks ago, Betty Friedan, which was really the book that, you know, kind of launched second wave feminism. And, you know, I think there's a lot of truth in that book about how women did feel trapped in their home, where they were given this bill of goods that if you have a family and you get married to a good guy and have all the amenities and everything you could want, you will be happy and you'll be, you know, have the best life. And then all these women found themselves with everything that they were told would give them happiness, and it didn't. And, you know, who knows how much of that era was from things like postpartum depression or, you know, underlying issues that we just didn't really understand that well yet, or know kind of how big the scope was. And but, you know, women did feel trapped in their home and with their family, and didn't feel fulfilled. And so then they were, you know, wanting to look outward and see, well, guys are, you know, working, they have careers and they have respect and they have awards and they have, you know, people giving them lifetime achievement awards, and why can't I be that kind of person? And so, you know, that did really get second wave feminism going, and wanting to combat stereotypes in the workforce and open opportunities, you know, the glass ceiling sort of thing. And so now we have, you know, we have all these options, and now we're kind of, you know, option paralysis, right? We don't know which way to go. And then if we end up somewhere we aren't happy, then we're wondering, well, which path did we take was the wrong way? But, you know, for me, I think having like if I did end my career right now, I am really proud of it. And that is, I think, giving me the motivation to start a family. But what we have now that women didn't have during the Feminine Mystique is basically the world at your fingertips at home. And you can be an entrepreneur and CEO and never leave your house and make a good living. So, you know, I think everything's in flux right now, and definitely for women. I think guys are starting to see things shifting as well now. But I don't know where I was going with that. But
well, that's why I think, you know, if you're going to make this into a movie, I think that that's so relevant, because not just so, you know, other women who are dealing with miscarriages can have someone to relate to with that, but also in the bigger conversation of women are having children later now. And that means there's going to be more complications. It's going to be harder for more of us. And that makes that's hard, because like you just said, like we're at a point in time where we have more freedom than any women ever in the history of humankind ever, which is such a blessing for us. But also now we have this situation where we're like, okay, but how do we juggle that with this other part of us that so many of us still want, families?
Right.
That's very hard.
And you know, this can't ever be said enough, but the idea of women having it all has been a horrible lie that, you know, leads women to that, you know, bewilderment of where to go. How can I can't do it all, but I want it all, and I'm told I should have it all.
And you're trying to do it all, and you're frustrated that you're not having it all.
And I think what we really need to let young women know is whatever life you choose, it will involve sacrifices. You know, for me, being CEO of Jaybird Productions and running this, you know, this film that really I think people thought was some multi-million-dollar production with all these screenings taking place everywhere and people talking about it. No, we were just a couple people, and you know, we're trying to do it all, and it was very taxing on my body and on my health, and just stress, and, you know, lack of sleep, and then oversleep from depression of not being happy with where things are going, and never seeing sunlight because you're stuck editing. And so, you know, I definitely, the red pill was, you know, now I guess 6 years of sacrifice. And of course, you know, while I was going through the miscarriage, you can't help but wonder, like, well, you know, I started the red pill when I was 27. That's the average age of a woman's first pregnancy in the US. It's like, I think it's 26 to 29 is around that time. And, you know, so I could have zigged or zagged, and I zagged. But we'll see where it goes. And if I end up never being able to do it naturally, then we'll go from there. And at least I have found a career that is fulfilling. So,
yeah. I mean, again, thank you for that. I think hopefully, like the red pill, it's going to open up the conversation.
Yeah.
That's really hard to have. So I think that's really great.
Thank you. Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure some people will be like, well, how does this relate to gender politics? It doesn't have to, you know. Having a miscarriage, it's just something, you know, so much is blamed on the patriarchy. I don't think this can be one of them. And also, well, maybe, you know, actually a lot of things can be talked around, but you know, I actually think a lot of gender issues, rather than blaming on the patriarchy, could be blamed on Mother Nature. There's things about our biology that are very different, and we go through different things. And, you know, when I was in the process of miscarrying, I thought, like, I cannot heavy lift anything. So when, you know, you're on a plane and someone takes your luggage down from the overhead bin and they're a man and you're a woman, I'm really grateful for that, because you don't know if that person is pregnant or what they're going through. You know, there was a point when I was in a grocery store and I got a contraction, and because you're like contracting and dilating during the miscarriage, and I just like bawled over and dropped the tongs and the Brussels sprouts, and so, you know, you just don't know what people are going through, and I think there are a lot of women who are going through, whether it be as simple as PMS or your menstrual cycle, but then there's, you know, menopause, and then there's miscarriages, and there's even things like stillbirth. You know, oh my God, learning about stillbirth is one of the most, I can't even imagine.
I can imagine.
So I think we just all have to be really understanding of each other. And I think right now, women's reproductive health is so, because if we want to relate it to gender politics, it's so, the thing that's really getting all the attention is abortion rights. There's not necessarily any rights to fight for in regards to miscarriage, but I think there is definitely a conversation. So.
Yeah, and it'll be good to see it coming from like a career-oriented woman. Because there's a lot of us out there that don't totally know how to navigate this space. So I think that's really great. I mean, it's, you know, trying to make light of an otherwise really tragic situation. So
yeah,
good for you. Good for you. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to get out there about, you know, I mean, really anything, your red pill journey or what you have coming up, just anything that you think people should know?
God. Well, I was gonna start trying to dispel all the myths about the film, but I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall with all that. And, you know, if people have heard anything about the film that makes them not want to watch it, go to our website, theredpillmovie.com. There's a dispelling myths section. You don't have to be afraid of what the trolls out there online are trying to take down the film about with lies. But yeah, I hope the conversation keeps going about men's issues, and I think we just need to broaden the scope, you know, and be more inclusive of all people, and stop excusing hating on certain groups by calling them the privileged or the oppressors, and be willing to look at victims regardless of their demographic, and look at the problems that we see in a more nuanced way, and all the factors contributing to that. So yeah, I hope we can just have more exploration of minds.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. There you go. That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Amazing conversation. I mean, I don't even think we covered everything that could have been covered, to be honest. But it like a lot of the conversations we have here, this is a really difficult one to have. So thank you for coming on and going through all of that, and also for telling us about what you have coming up. Like, we'll definitely stay tuned. You'll have to come back on to talk about that when it's up and running, and whatever we can do to help.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on, and I love what you guys are doing, and I really appreciate this type of forum to talk at length without, creative editing, because, these things are nuanced and they do take a lot of breath and airtime to get everything out and realize it's not black and white. And by saying something doesn't mean so you're saying something horrible. So, yeah, thank you for giving a platform to new ideas and new conversations.
We're trying. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you soon, I hope.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.